Sorry to be a few minutes late in starting. Good evening. We'll go ahead and call to order our regular session of March 26, 2019. First order of business we have on the agenda this evening is the opening prayer and pledges of allegiance to the flag of the United States and the state of Texas. Councilmember Davis will lead us, and if you'll join me in standing, please.
Heavenly Father, thank you on behalf of all who are gathered here today. Thank you for providing for our health, our friendship, and thank you for the opportunity to serve you and watching over our community. As we offer this prayer tonight, I pray for our city officials, this council, and I ask that you instill the desire to listen with understanding and goodwill, grant them wisdom to guide their decisions, and to act in your name to serve the betterment of our community. I also ask that you please watch over our first responders as they work to keep our community safe. In your name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. All right, first thing following that, we have presentations this evening, and first being an introduction of the student mayors and student council members for the day. And Mrs. Dennis, I'll let you kick us off with this one.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, and citizens. In partnering with the school district, the city has been able to reach out to our 7th and 8th graders, students of those that are either chosen by their peers or by their teachers, to participate in a program that begins to teach them a little bit about what the city does. Today we had our third set of students from the 7th and 8th grade come to learn a little bit about local city government. They toured PD, EMS, and our fire department. The students came in later back to have lunch into the chambers and heard from the mayor about his roles, Mayor Pro Tem, and the council members about their roles, as well as the city manager and assistant city manager's roles. We were honored today to have our PD K-9 officer, Jason Hanley, come, who is the handler of our K-9 police dog, Amador. We had a great time with that dog. The students learned so much in a few hours that they can now take some of that back information to their peers and also to their parents. This programs could not have happened if we didn't work together as a team to make the program come to fruition. There were so many people involved today to make it happen. I thank everybody from PD all the way to the council. Mayor, if you'd be so kind and please allow the students to introduce themselves and maybe tell a little bit about what they learned today, and after which, if you and Dr. Brown would come up and join me in front so we could provide a presentation to the students.
Certainly. Well, first of all, thank you all for joining us today, and I enjoyed spending the few minutes that we had together about talking about the city and city government and you know, a full spectrum of great questions from these students about not only city government, but why and what and where'd that come from. It was great discourse. So with that, why don't we start? We'll just go from right to left, and Ben, we'll start with you, and if you'll introduce yourself and anything that you've prepared to say about your day, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, I got the mic to work. I don't know who chose me to start talking first, but here I am. I definitely had a fun time coming here to City Hall, or whatever you call this. I always get the names mixed up. But it was just interesting learning. You always think like there's just someone at the top and he's just telling everyone in the city what to do and how it happens. But it was fun learning that there's a lot more to go into it, and there's like so many different people all controlling different people, and it's just interesting seeing how all that works and how you can keep a city together. And yeah, if it seems like I'm shaking, it's not because I'm nervous. You can make up your own story as to why, but I'm just happy to be here. It was also fun to look at the different branches of like community service and seeing the EMS and the fire department and the police department, seeing how that works and how they're just a big family. And it was really interesting just to see that these are real people. They're not just, like figures. They're not just leaders or whatever. They are real people, and it's fun being able to know that we're under leadership that's not just focused on themselves and making sure everything's good for them, but that they focus on the people. And there we go.
Very good. Well said, and thank you, sir. All right, Santanas. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. My name is Santanas Locklear. I'm from Corbett Junior High, a 7th grader. And today I learned multiple things. I learned about what the first responders do, how they do it, and what they do when they're not out saving hundreds of lives. But most importantly, I learned that our emergency responders, the mayor, the secretary, and everyone in their respective places are doing their best to make sure the citizens of Schertz, Texas, are doing their best to make sure that everybody is being safe and is comfortable in their homes.
Very good. Thank you, sir, and well said. All right, Mia. You're up, sir. Or rather, I'll tell you what, since Ellis is coming in, come on in, have a seat. And you're timely. It's perfect. And if you want to share anything, introduce yourself quickly and anything you want to share about your day, you're welcome to do so. Grab that microphone and bring it toward you. There you go.
All right. I'm Ellis Campbell from Adobe.
See if the green light is on too.
I'm Ellis Campbell from Adobe Junior High, 8th grade. My social studies teacher was Mr. Bagley, and I learned a lot here, particularly about our local government and how it runs, and the different types of local governments there are, and how ours is run, the different positions in the local government and what they do. Probably my favorite part of the day was learning about this stuff, and also they brought in a canine unit, and I got to learn about what they do. We got to pet the dog, so that was pretty nice.
All right, very good. Thank you, sir. All right, Miss Mia.
Hello all, my name is Mira Rodriguez and I'm a 7th grader at Adobe Junior High. Today I got the privilege of touring the facilities here as well as learning more about the responsibilities that come with leading such a great city such as Schertz. For example, I actually learned that they offer ENT courses that you can start taking when you're 17 years old here, and that really interested me because that's something that I want to do when I'm older, and I think it's really nice that the government can get involved with the students so that they can learn more about what they can do when they're older. I also learned some more lighthearted stuff, such as, spoiler alert, firefighters actually don't spend all day playing video games. Later that day, I got the chance to meet with Councilmember Edwards Gutierrez and Mayor Pro Tem Hayward, City Manager Brown, and Mayor Carpenter. They all gave me valuable information about our local government, and I got to know more about these city leaders and what they do for us day in and day out. Following that, I was actually able to get to know one of the canine units, and it was interesting to see all the different kinds of things they do and how important they actually are to the safety of our city. And it was really fun to work with a dog, even though I did get a lot of fur on my blanket. And all in all, today was an amazing day, and I'd like to thank Miss Brenda for helping make this possible.
Very good. Thank you for joining us. All right, let's head down. So before I go back up to the dais, as some of you have already figured out, you don't have to stay there, and I imagine and guess you may have homework. And if you need to take off and get out of here and take care of that, you're welcome to do so. Thanks to all the family members for joining us tonight. We really enjoyed having you folks with us. All right. That's great stuff. And they really did ask some great questions today. Some of them were, they weren't surprising, but they were far beyond what I thought were the years for these kids. They did a great job. All right, next item, we have a presentation update from the Guadalupe County Regional Medical Center, prescription assistance report, and Dr. Riggs is here this evening. Welcome as always. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening. My name is Jerry Riggs. I'm the pharmacy manager at Guadalupe Regional, the Prescription Assistance Program. And our program actually provides medication to patients that have no insurance or are underinsured, and patients that have very low income. Currently, our report we're looking at is for the last 6 months, from September 1st through February of this year. And during that time, we served a little over 1,000 patients. That includes patients that are actually in our program. Currently, we have about 730 patients that are routinely in our program. But we also serve patients that are discharged from the hospital there at Guadalupe Regional that have no insurance, and any emergency room patients that are provided with prescriptions that they can't afford, that we also take care of that for them. The total number of prescriptions during that 6 months is about 21,000 prescriptions that we did during that time. And the retail dollar of those, if you went out and actually paid cash for them at a retail like CVS, Walmart, or H-E-B somewhere, would be around $8 million. So quite a few dollars we've actually dispensed at that point. The number of patients that are actually Schertz residents are 27 during that 6-month period. And we actually dispense probably about 3.5 prescriptions a month to each Schertz resident. The actual retail value to patients that are in Schertz per patient, just a little over $19,000 a year. The patients we actually see are usually chronic disease type patients, usually with diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular diseases. One thing we've added recently in the last few years is a clinic that actually sees a lot of the underinsured patients in Guadalupe County. And they actually see acute care type patients where they may come in with the flu, cough and cold problems. Some even have some little cuts and minor scrapes that they may have to get a few stitches in and tetanus shots and so forth like that. One thing we're going to start providing through the clinic and through the prescription assistance program here in the next few months is actually seeing patients in larger numbers that have hepatitis C, which back when I first started, hepatitis C was pretty much a death sentence. If you had it, you weren't going to make it very long. Today, it's actually treatable and curable, and we can provide a lot of medications that actually cure these patients. The The big kind of downside to the medication side of that is that a lot of the treatments cost about $30,000 a month for treatment. If you got insurance, a lot of insurance will pay for it, but with no insurance, of course, it's not affordable, but we can provide that service now. So that's something new. If you look at the kind of bottom line for our program, cost about $350,000 a year to run, and through the fee that we charge, $15 a month for the patients, and like the city of Schertz contributing $5,000 a year, and the city of Seguin and a few other organizations, get it down to the point where we're only losing about $200,000 a year, which seems like quite a bit of money, at least to me. And but the one thing that one of the accountants at the hospital told me, you're actually not a revenue-producing department. You're a cost savings department. If we can save a few people from being in the hospital, we've saved probably several $100,000 at that point. So that's how they look upon us at this point. Are there any questions?
Council, questions for Dr. Riggs? Mr. Edwards.
You know, I just want to make a comment. I've been on the council for quite some time, and I can tell you the commitment that you guys have had through the medical center of coming out every 6 months. Most people will come out every year or when they're having an event. I think it's the Regional Medical Center and the Guadalupe County Advocacy Program that's here consistently. It might not feel that way, but I see it, and I go, that's remarkable. That hepatitis C treatment that you're talking about, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the cost for that per month for is one pill now, right? Isn't it Harvoni or something?
It's just one drug. Yeah, there's sometimes multiple drugs involved in it, but one drug might be $30,000.
Per treatment?
Yes.
And that's, you take that, 13, 14 months or something like that, right?
Now it's a little bit shorter term. I think they can go like maybe 4 to 6 months even.
Okay, so
the newer ones.
So $150,000 for 5 months. Wow.
It's amazing.
Thank you for what you do. I appreciate it.
Very good. Council, anyone else? Not Dr. Riggs. Thank you as always for coming to visit with us and for the work that you do. We really do appreciate it. Good stuff. All right, next up this evening, we have announcements of upcoming city events, and Mr. James.
So this Friday, March 29th, we have another movie in the park. It features the movie Hop, some of you may be familiar with. That kicks off at 7 p.m., but typically they don't actually start the movie till it starts getting dark. And that's at Windy Swan Memorial Park at 4601 Cherry Tree Drive. You know, we're trying to move those through different locations in the community. But again, come along as E.B., the Easter Bunny's teenage son, heads to Hollywood, determined to become a drummer in a rock and roll band. Will E.B. choose fame over family tradition? Find out and join us for the first Music and Movies in the Park series event of 2019. So those of us with teenage sons probably can relate to this quite a bit with the Easter Bunnies going through. Friday, March 29th, and then Saturday the 30th is the Red Before bookstore book sale. That's from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Schertz Public Library. The bookstore a few times a year does the book sales. You can fill up a bag of books or a bag for $4 that they'll provide. So that's Friday and Saturday. Next council meeting is Tuesday, April 2nd here in council chambers. We have the city council pre-budget retreat. That's Friday, April 5th at 8:30 a.m. And for folks who may want to attend, that is at the Schertz-Cibolo Universal City ISD boardroom. The Civic Center was booked, so we've moved over to that location for it. That's at 1030 L Bell Road. And then Sunday, April 7th is Moving on Main from noon to 4. Oh, and I'm sorry, I apologize. We had noted former city manager Mark Marquez passed away. Services for him are Wednesday, April 3rd, 11:30 with the visitation, 12:30 service kicks off, and that's at Schertz Funeral Home.
Thank you, Mr. James. Next, announcements, recognitions by the city manager. Dr. Brown.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I have several recognitions tonight. It's always a pleasure to recognize our great employees, and it's a pleasure for me to see them in action every day. First, we have Jennifer Colby, and Jennifer works in our Economic Development Department. She put on the employment fair that was at the Civic Center today. We had 9 employers and 200 job seekers attend today's hiring fair. She did a great job pulling the whole thing together. She also wanted to recognize the other staff members, the Civic Center, Public Affairs, Public Works, and the Economic Development Corporation for their help. So it was a joint team effort and a very successful event. Also, we have some recognitions in the police department. First is Officer Amanda Cato. She intervened in the life of a person in crisis, was able to calm the individual, and she was recognized by the family for connecting and communicating with others. I think that's a tribute to Amanda's training and the training that we have in the police department. Also recognized by the police department, Officer Jeff Kravaka, Officer Dallas Hopper, they actually assisted a shooting victim. They applied life-saving measures to stop the bleeding. They acted very swiftly and took control of the situation, also a reflection of their training. And then we have three other officers, Officer Michael Rapier, Sean O'Leary, and Alan Samaniego, and they were able, during a serious accident, to apply life-saving measures, to apply CPR during a major accident, and were able to render that aid in a very timely manner. So, again, Chief, tribute to your officers and to the training that's done in the police department.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Next up, announcements and recognitions by the mayor. I would just like to add to Mr. James' commentary. Former city manager and prior to being city manager, longtime city employee Mark Marquez passed away very suddenly this past week. And again, services will be on Wednesday, April 3rd. I believe you said it here at Schertz Funeral Home. So anybody that's able to attend is a public servant that gave a lot of his time to this city, as many have done, and it challenging for the family. It came on so very suddenly. So that said, we'll move on then to hearing of residents, and first up this evening is Brent Bolter. Mr. Bolter.
Brent Bolter, 2633 Cloverbrook Lane. Mr. Mayor, City Council, Dr. Brown. Earlier this month, I found out that some of you felt that I was bullying you when I spoke on February 5th and asked if you would consider leaving a Facebook community page and outline some reasons why I was asking you to. I thought about that for a while, and I have to ask. Did you feel bullied when I asked you to vote no on a rezoning of a parcel of land? Did you feel bullied when I asked you to vote no on firing Dr. Brown's predecessor? Did you feel bullied when I asked you to support working with Cibolo on taking care of Wiederstein Road? Did you feel bullied on any of the multiple times I've been before you and asked for you to do something other than on February 5th? On February 5th, I came before you and asked if you would consider leaving a Facebook community page where some of the activities going on there have been described as reprehensible by a special prosecutor for Guadalupe County, and is investigated from the Guadalupe County Sheriff's Department. That's all I did. You were free then, and you were free all the other times I've come before you to do whatever you wanted to do. Now, for clarity purposes, this would be an example of what bullying would be like, in my opinion, had I come before you on February 5th and said, I want you to leave the Facebook community page, and if you don't, I'll make sure that everyone else that wants you out of it to come to your home and to your business and hound you until you do. That, my friends, is bullying. I simply made a request, as I had done many times before in this chamber. I know this isn't in keeping with the normal practice in hearing of residents, but Mr. Mayor, I'd like to offer up the opportunity if anyone on council or if you or Dr. Brown has any questions on this, I'd be happy to answer them to the extent that I can.
Very good.
Okay, no questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Next signed up this evening is Dana Eldridge.
Dana Eldridge, 2628 Gallant Fox Drive, Schertz, Texas, 78108. your Belmont Park guys are showing up tonight again. I got my new water meter. The folks were real good about checking it out when I complained last time about how I had a misread. So I got my new water meter. So far it's been doing the same thing the old one did, telling me that I'm using too much water. So guys are doing a good job, seemingly like they're out there. I did read something in the notes for tonight that we want to charge a fee of $50 for somebody who doesn't want to use the new type meter. My only thought on that is hit them with a hard hit for having to install the old style meter that they have to go out and read, but don't charge them such an exorbitant amount every month to read it. Because when it comes time for them to sell their house or whatever and you want to go put the new meter in there, you got to have something to put back in, and you don't want to really have to charge the new owner that fee. The other thing I wanted to ask about, or just to make a comment about, is I see we were having another automotive repair place being put up on I-35. We have several nice automotive repair shops in our city. We've got a new QT gas station getting ready to happen across from Randolph Brooks up here on 3009. So that'll make, what is it, seven or eight gas stations right around the 3009-35 intersection. I see that you guys like to have us buy gas and get our cars repaired here in Schertz so that we can go to other cities around the area to find a nice restaurant. We have some relatively nice restaurants, but we'd like to see some of them upgraded. So if you could please put it in your schedule to look at that, to provide that for us so that we don't have to drive quite so far to do that.
Thank you, sir. Next up, I believe it says Michael Paul. And if I misread your name, let me know. I can see it on your shirt. I got it right. Yes.
Yes, sir, you did.
Well, welcome.
Mayors, esteemed council members, and other public servants in attendance. Community Emergency Response Team, CERT, is an emergency response organization comprised of citizen volunteers who are trained to respond in their communities in times of natural disaster or major emergencies. Members supplement, not supplant, first response agencies who may not be able to provide immediate response for a variety of reasons. CERT members receive training from CERT master instructors according to FEMA standards to provide basic fire suppression, mass casualty medical operations, light search and rescue, and psychological assistance for survivors and team members during emergencies. Our CERT organization has also included in its bylaws a provision to provide an emergency response for any medical emergency where an individual requires emergency medical aid. We are registered to provide services to all counties in Texas as a volunteer fire department providing emergency fire and medical services beginning May 3rd, 2017. My name is Michael Paul. I'm the elected Chief Executive Officer and President of our CERT organization, and I've been a CERT volunteer since 2009, providing emergency services in Comal, Guadalupe, and Bexar counties. Our organization is registered as a nonprofit 501c3 with the IRS and is state tax exempt. Being a nonprofit, we rely on charitable contributions provided by the community. As required by state law, we have been registered with the Texas Secretary of State according to Occupations Code 1803 that regulates solicitation activities by public safety entities. Our registration number is 20170002 and is current. In the past 2 years, I have personally been detained by police officers of the Schertz Police Department, including one officer who committed perjury in municipal court, who was later discharged by the department. The first 2 tickets for soliciting without a permit were dismissed by Judge Dolnig. The next ticket was issued for a transportation code prohibiting solicitation within 50 feet of a state highway because Occupations Code 1803.002 preempts all city ordinances that relates to solicitation for our organization. When I cited the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling that solicitation for a charitable cause was ruled as protected speech under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and was still found guilty by a trial jury and fined by this city's municipal court, which is currently on appeal, have to stop and wonder and question why the police department is violating people's constitutional rights. Now, the first week of this month, I sent a legal notice electronically to the Chief of Police, Chief Michael Hansen, and all officers of his department, stating our association had renewed the state permit under Occupations 1803 and intended to exercise our lawful collection of donations. I have since been detained on 3 separate occasions by officers of this city police department, and the last one resulted in another ticket for listing without a permit. Texas Occupations Code Section 1803.002, effect on municipal ordinance. This chapter preempts any municipal ordinance applicable to public safety entities, public safety publications, public safety solicitors, or solicitations related to a person registered under this chapter. I am registered under this chapter as the applying officer who completed and signed the renewal application for the state permit. I've once again agreed to appear in municipal court on this new issue. The officer who decided to my exercise of a constitutional right should now be converted into a crime, has committed a federal civil rights crime under USC Chapter 18.242, deprivation rights under color of law. I won't read that federal statute to you folks, so I believe you already know it. If you have any questions for me, I'd be more than happy to answer any of them.
Thank you, sir. Because we don't have a posting for this on the agenda, the Texas Open Meetings Act prohibits us from having a discussion back and forth at this time. So I appreciate the comments, and if you have anything else you'd like to add, I'll give you some more time.
Sir, if you'd like to add it to a schedule for a later hearing, that'd be fine.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, council members, public servants. Have a good day.
Thank you. Next up, Mark Roberts.
Mark Roberts, 4300 Spanish Oak, Schertz, Texas. I'm wondering if I wouldn't be better served to speak on the workshop agenda item, because it has to do with development. Because I'm not sure what they're going to speak about, and they may cover what I want to talk about anyway.
I'd say since now you have the time, go ahead and hit us with it, and then we'll know in advance if it's something we can cover or not cover, and if we miss it, we'll know.
Okay, we can do that. Well, I just think we have to take a hard look at what our intent is when we start looking at the buildings and stuff and what we want a building to look like. Because one of the discussions that I've had is we want to use stucco, and we've wanted to use some different materials that have a stucco finish or a tilt wall finish. And we're not allowed to use that type of material. And I don't think it's the material that's in question so much, is that what they're trying to do is get a certain look to a building. So you can buy some panels that you can have a precast finish or a stucco finish or any other number of finishes. And so the reason I bring that into question is, one, is the building I'm trying to develop is that we're not allowed to use stucco on more than 50% of any facade. It doesn't matter what side of the building it is. But yet if I was building a tilt wall building, then I could have a tilt wall building and I could do 100%. I recently just went and took some pictures of some buildings that some were tilt wall, some were not tilt wall. And one of them was the new Evo building that I went and took a picture of, is that when I look at the side of that building, it is just a precast building, and they've done some stuff for aesthetics with paint. That's all they've done is just with paint, which I would argue the fact that we can do the same thing with stucco and paint as we could do with a tilt wall. Where it comes into play is on a smaller building, anything less than about 10,000 square feet, it becomes cost prohibitive to do a tilt wall building. And so that's why you have some other construction that's done, either it's done with block or it's done with metal, and then a backing put on it and stucco put over it. So I think that's just something that we have to look at, because I think what that's doing is, that requirement is doing, it's really kind of causing the small guy just to build some expensive buildings. And I also think from a development standpoint, a developer can come in and build these buildings and he can, try to meet all these requirements, but yet then his rent has to be so high that they can never keep the tenants. And so when I look at that and I look at, what we're trying to do, I think the problem is we're trying to write a code for everything that could possibly ever happen in the city, and I don't really think that's the intent. I think we can look at stuff. We have rules in our business, and we have SOPs in our business, but they don't cover 100% of everything. We realize that, hey, there's probably 10% of those things that aren't aren't going to fall into that. And you know what? We're going to make adjustments and we're going to take care of the customer. I don't feel that our planning department has that leeway. I feel like their hands are so tied, and they're, you know, I don't want to say they're afraid, but you give them this document and say, here it is. This is the Bible for development. Do not alter this. Do not go around or anything. And from a business perspective, we don't have any option any longer. If they don't agree to something, we used to could be able to go to council. We could appeal something to council or Board of Adjustment. But my understanding now is Board of Adjustment can only look at those items that are a hardship, not a financial hardship, but I believe it's like a legal hardship, which really leaves an owner with nowhere to go. It's either, hey, you do what we say you're going to do, or you don't develop here. And some of these things happen during the process where, you know, guys already got so much money out that, you know, they're saying, well, hey, oops, we missed this. You got to do this. And then they have this big expense that they're not prepared for. If they have SBA loan, then that screws up their SBA loan. They have to go get those approvals and stuff. And I would say a good example of that, and I believe it's on the agenda, is our fire station and the $250,000 expenditure that they're going to have, which you think about that from a guy that's going out there to do a development, and wham, he said with this, hey, we're going to have to do this. This is an increase, a change order. You know, it's a little over $250,000. Well, you guys used to get to vote on it and say, hey, you know what, we're already into this project, let's just do it. You're not feeling it in your pocketbook like a small business owner would. So I think we just have to take a hard look at some of that stuff, and I know my time's up, and so thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, that's everyone that I had signed up this evening. So next on the agenda, we have workshops. The first item of a workshop is Resolution 19R35, which is a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the approval of the comprehensive annual financial report for fiscal year 2017 to 2018 and other matters in connection therewith. So, Mr. Walters, do you have this, or Mr. James?
If I may.
Oh, I got you. So Mrs. Fraser's not here at the moment.
She is in Cibolo doing theirs, so if we could push her back.
Sure.
And then when she comes in,
We can
we'll
make
catch
that
it.
accommodation. The next one will be a workshop, discussion, and possible action regarding the extension of FM 3009 to FM 78. Mr. Nowak, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here to talk about FM 3009, specifically the extension of it south of FM 78. Why is the extension needed? It's needed for a variety of reasons. One of them, that it fits the basic grid concept of providing access to roadways through a community or area. It complements other thoroughfare plans. It's really kind of needed to support traffic growth, particularly our long-term traffic needs. And it provides another north-south route to connect I-10 to I-35 through our community. Grid concept means you have arterials, collectors, and local streets spaced at regular intervals. Ideally, you want your arterial spaced at 1 mile intervals and your collector at half-mile intervals, and then other connecting roadways at quarter-mile intervals or less, but typically right around quarter-mile intervals. Having that basic grid system, you think in some of the older cities when they first started to develop, that's how they were laid out. And they work very efficiently. Once you start breaking down or not following that grid kind of setup, or you start developing ultra-high density, it starts to break down. But it's a very efficient way to move traffic, to spread the traffic load around an area. As I mentioned, it complements other plans. If you look at our master thoroughfare plan, look at the routes that I highlighted in green. These represent routes that are either in place or planned that provide connectivity between I-10 and 35. You have 1604, then you have 1518. The 1518 kind of has a big disconnect right at 78. It's not easy to get past 78 on 1518. The next one would be FM 3009. Then after that, you have the extension of 1103 in Cibolo. Then further beyond that, about the Schwab area, you have another north-south route. Again, a lot of that is outside our jurisdiction, but if you look holistically at the area, you start to see that grid develop. Unfortunately, all these spacings are not quite at that ideal level. They're a little bit further apart than that. Multiple routes are needed to provide movement through our community. You know, as Schertz continues to grow, one road just is not going to be sufficient to carry all the traffic. You start getting bottlenecks not only on that one road, but you start having traffic impacts and breakdowns on the routes leading to that road because everybody's trying to funnel to one location. If you could spread it out a little bit more, then you kind of ease that burden and not everybody's trying to funnel through one choke point. We mentioned it provides the other route. It helps fill in the grid. It already has some connections to some of our other collectors and everything along the way, and as it would be extended south as further development occurs, it would connect up to some of the other planned connectors that are in our master thoroughfare plan. And it would really help split the traffic load, particularly in our community, if we had that other north-south route. As part of that, one of the key components of that is the intersection at 78. In the master thoroughfare plan, it's identified as a grade-separated crossing. Go over it and the railroad tracks, both of them. And that's to avoid some of the bottlenecks that occur, like we have it at 1518, but also when the train comes through our community, everything stops or would stop because you can't get around the train. If you go over, have the grade separation, that isn't as big of an issue. Why am I here before you this evening talking about it? You know, the master thoroughfare plan, there are some parts of it that may not happen for many years. So why the urgency this evening? Well, we've got a lot of development activity in some of the vacant parcels right in that vicinity right now, and we kind of have to give some direction to those developers. Where do we need to dedicate right-of-way to make this happen? It's kind of the linchpin of this route. This is a key component. How do we get this crossing in over 78? And then that kind of fits or sets the tone for the rest of the extension southward. If we keep waiting, the longer we wait, the more it's going to cost to do anything. So we're kind of talking about the green highlight, that linchpin, and the other picture shows you the parcels that are outlined in green are the parcels that have come to us recently with development plans. That's a pretty good number of them right in this area where this linchpin, this crossover needs to happen. If you keep your eye on the picture, you'll see another route that will overlay on it automatically. But here's two possible routes that kind of fit east of the lift station on the south side of 78. And you can kind of see how a relatively minor change in alignment kind of has a big impact on the parcels north of 78. This one, being on the west side of the lift station, has an impact on the property south of 78 as well as impacts on the north. And these are but just a few possibilities of how to get that crossing. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, can you, okay, so right here at the very top above the shaded gray area, that's the storage facility. So everyone out there will know where you're talking about. So just if you could give them a reference point. Papa John's is back up here on the corner. Okay.
This is the mini storage unit. Here's 3009. This is 78. And this right now is a vacant area. This area is also a key component to it. It's at the site of an old landfill. So it's something we want to avoid as much as possible with whatever route we do. Here's a little bit closer look at how it would cross 78 and how it affects parcels to the north. You can see the two different routes, just a slight skew crossing 78 kind of makes a big difference of how it cuts across some of those parcels. Now, as I mentioned, this is just a couple of possibilities here, and it still crosses that landfill area, although it does keep it kind of towards the edge where hopefully we don't have as much bad stuff to deal with. But here's another possible alignment. Now this one is oriented a little bit differently. North would be to the left side of the picture. You see, this one doesn't have an impact on the parcels on the north side, but it has a big impact on the property on the south side of 78. Look at another possibility. You kind of have the same thing. You have some impact, you have a large impact with the mini storage unit, and you have a large impact with the property on the south side of FM 78 that's currently vacant. So as we go through these, and here's another one, yet another one that has a major impact on all of the parcels. So the issue here is, depending upon what route is selected or what perspective you look at, if you're a property owner looking to develop the property on the south side of 78, you want one of the first two routes. Those work for you. Minimal impact to your site, you have a lot of area left you can develop, but it has an adverse impact on the other parcels that want to develop on the north side of 78. If you look from the north side of 78, a route that benefits them does so at the detriment of those other properties south of them. So why we're here tonight is to try to get some direction from council. And we have some options. You know, we can simply say, okay, we're not going to do anything right now. We're not going to worry about it. We'll let the vacant parcels develop how they want and try to deal with this down the road, you know, when we need the connection more. That has pros and cons to it, like any option. You know, increased costs down later, and depending upon how something develops or what gets built there, it may preclude the crossover or direct connection down the road. We could try to preserve right-of-way by making a guess. What alignment do we think is going to work? And that may or may not fit our needs when we actually get to a point of construction. Or we could try to make an investment and try to identify a preferred alignment, pin down the footprint of the right-of-way that we need, that would give us direction to these developers and kind of set the framework for what we need to do to proceed down the road. Now, there's a couple of different options, and when you see those numbers, I have to admit I had sticker shock when I got them too. It's unfortunately, it's not a cheap venture. But there's two options. The first option, the lower cost option, gets us to a point where we have the basic right-of-way identified. We don't have full environmental clearance or anything like that, but we have done some basic environmental investigations so we know what the issues are, we know what further investigations we may need to do. The higher dollar amount represents what would be necessary to take it through the full environmental clearance process, so at the end of that, you'd have a route that is environmentally cleared, and then you could immediately roll into design and proceed along with design. Now, even with the lower cost option, we would work with TxDOT as much as possible to make sure we dot the I, cross the T's, so we follow the federal procurement rules, because in all honesty, you know, a project of this nature, we're probably going to go through the MPO for federal funds to help build it. So anything we do, we don't want to jeopardize that down the road. And that's part of the reason why the price tag's so high, is there's a lot of stuff that you have to do, a lot of steps you have to do, and you have to be precise in each one of those steps. And if you're going to ultimately pursue federal funding. So I ran through this really pretty quick, and that's kind of why we're here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, very good. We'll open up to council. Mr. Edwards?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for doing this. I got to tell you, it's been years since we saw the thoroughfare showing that particular diagram cutting 3009 across, and you're absolutely right. When a train comes through Schertz, we're pretty much cut off, you know, and there's one alternate route that we can take to get under the train track. I've always believed in a hub and spoke system, or the distribution center system, where everything comes in and goes into a roundabout and flowing of traffic. I think that's a great idea. In this case here, I have a couple of questions about engineering. You have the landfill that Mr. Gutierrez, he tried to give us that landfill one time. However, we were dealing with TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So we you know, was that going to be our problem? Do we handle that going forward? Core sampling. If we decide to do this, you're going to have to do core samples and engineering to find out if it's going to be the best route. It's going to be long term. Is it feasible? You have to purchase properties, right? If we purchase those properties while they're vacant, I think that's the least costly way of doing it. If we wait until people start developing those properties, we're going to start seeing the prices go up, and that will be detrimental to what we're trying to accomplish. So with that being said, you're asking us for direction, right? Being here as long as I have, I can tell you I've had people come into my office with their site plans and say to me, hey, I just need a minute of your time. What are you guys going to do with 3009? Because I don't want to start a building project. I don't want to put my store there. I don't want to locate my facility there, knowing that you're going to put like an overpass over my building or cut me off from frontage. And I can certainly understand that investment in asking the questions. I think we move forward by setting aside or putting this in the budget to actually a little bit more, because I think we go in saying 500 to 1.5 million, and next thing you know, you're at 2.4. I think we put a little bit more with some overage in it, just in case. But thank you for the presentation. Well done.
Very welcome.
Mr. Gutierrez.
I share the same perspective Mr. Edwards does. My question is, who determines the best route that we're going? You showed us 3 different options as to how the road was going to cut. Who determines which one will be selected?
If we decided to proceed with either one of those 2 options or that process, it would be similar to what you've seen in some TxDOT projects, other federal projects. We would have engineering services would do core samples. They look at a whole variety, way beyond just the few that we looked at this evening. You would have a heavy public involvement with stakeholders, with council. All of that would get boiled down to say what makes the most sense for everybody. You know, you're not going to be able to please every single person with a project like this, but what works the best for everybody involved. It's a pretty long process that you go through where you get public input as well as input from you all to determine what is the preferred alignment. All of those things come into play.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Davis?
You know, there's a saying that says, failing to plan is planning to fail. I can imagine there's a lot of folks in Schertz that feel that extending 3009 is not required. You know, we've got that mindset of it's a small town and it's got that small town feel. The reality is we're at 40,000 people, and if you look at the land that's in our city limits and our ETJ, it's just going to keep on growing. I agree. I think the fact that those railroad tracks cut us off, as we grow, traffic is going to get worse. As we see a lot of the other projects that we've got now, people come back and say, well, you're building this, but the roads aren't ready for it. In a lot of cases, you just can't build the roads ahead of time before you build the things around it. Well, but you can plan for the roads. And I think this is one of those areas where it would definitely be in the city's best interest to at least explore the feasibility and know what we're getting into and figure out a route. And I think it would be the fairest thing for the people that own property along that area to know what could be coming versus us waiting and putting them on hold while we can't make a decision. So I think it's a pretty good idea to turn around and at least start looking at the feasibility and nailing down a route so that we have a plan, at least somewhere in the books, to pull off the shelf and dust off as we develop and go forward.
Dr. Scagliola.
Hey, thanks for bringing this up. I don't think anybody really denies the need to connect I-35 with I-10 some way. About 8 years ago, TxDOT had a plan to actually do something along 3009. It didn't seem right at the time. Their proposal, building bridges and whatnot that run parallel to a watershed area, it was just problematic. And the other thing was gaining the right-of-way. They were looking at over $1 million for the city to acquire the right-of-way because TxDOT wasn't going to do it. Like I said, nobody denies the need. A bridge over 78, the railroad tracks there, oh man, you'd have a lot of people singing your praises, I guarantee. One of the things I was considering is have we reached out to Cibolo? Because they're in the same predicament we are. Back 8 years ago when TxDOT was proposing the 3009 route, it seemed to make a little bit more sense to make an 1103 route down to I-10. Whether you go down Hackerville, eventually intersecting Hackerville, or Weir, and then Trainer Hale. Is it possible to go over 78 at 3009? Well, certainly it is. But there comes a point where perhaps if you're going to do a project like this, it makes more sense to actually do it with another entity out there. And I think Cibolo has the same kind of concerns that we do. So, like I said, it's a good idea. It's a great idea. Have we explored the feasibility of perhaps not doing it alone?
Okay. Council, anyone else? Mr. Brown?
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely nobody's going to argue the need for extra transportation. We're growing. South of 78 has been neglected for a long time, but and I really want to support us taking a serious look at this. But I do see, once we get over 78, once we get over the train tracks, to extend that road down there, the next thing is CCMA plant, and then floodplain. So it's just, we can't wait any longer because things are just not going to get any easier to work. So I fully support moving forward with some type of a planning or investigative initiative.
All right, Council, anyone else? All right, I'm going to comment on this one. We started discussing this when I was first on City Council, before the development occurred at the T at 3009 and 78. And the decision was made back then to allow that development to occur because the long-term cost of extending 3009 through the topography that exists on the other side of 3009, working our way, other side of 78, working our way to 10, was viewed as extraordinarily challenging and a very expensive prospect. So I have several questions I want to ask. You may not have answers to all of these, and I'm really not going to put you on the spot, but probably in the end say, hey, these are questions that when we do come back and have a discussion about what we want to do going forward, I'd really like to have answers to. So I guess the first one is this already a planned TxDOT expansion to take 3009 to Interstate 10? Because I don't think it's part of their current planning. And I feel like to some degree we would be pushing the proverbial wet noodle up the side of a hill to try to get this into a TxDOT priority position. The next one, I don't think this is the expansion of 3009 across 78 to 10 is on the Metropolitan Planning Organization plans or in any of the maps that I've seen that they have, and therefore I also don't believe it's currently an MPO priority. Any wild guess, a swag at the total cost for realignment of 3009 before we reach 78 and going all the way out to Interstate 10? I think it's probably in the $60 to $85 million range. And I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. My other concern is, what about the current investment? The businesses that have already invested at the T at 78 and 3009. If we reroute away from them, what does that do to them in the long term? If you look at some of the businesses on 3009 on the other side of 35 where the bridges were built, there were a number of businesses that failed because of the traffic that was diverted away from them as those bridges were built. No doubt the bridges were necessary. We needed to be able to get across two sets of train tracks in order for emergency services, but there was a a palatable economic development result of taking that action. The other one will be why would Tex not be leading this if it's truly a priority? I think we already may have answered that earlier because it's not on a current TxDOT map. And where would the traffic come from? What traffic problem, even at full build-out, would we be solving for? And I'll come back to that in just a minute as well. And then another thought that we've had in the past, wouldn't it be a fraction of that $60 to $85 million to work on bringing 1518 together and potentially putting a bridge over or working with the railroad to go under the railroad tracks there? Could we not accomplish a great deal by expanding the existing roads and having them actually line up? We already have close to $50 million is going to be invested in 1518. Getting a similar investment on the other side between 78 and 35 and aligning those would be a lot less expensive action, I think, than building a completely new road from 78 to 10. And I guess I will come back around to, since before I was on council, it has been the commentary of the Schertz City Council that we want to have a more rural type of environment in South Schertz between 78 and Interstate 10. We want less density. If we build a road like 3009 that pushes through that area that we've said we really are looking long-term to limit the density, are we providing an environment to increase density because of the traffic that we're going to push through, or is it a neutral? I don't really know off the top of my, I'm not sure I can answer that question, but it seems to be incongruent with the statements that we've made about the kind of development we want to see between 78 and I-10. I know that was a lot, and I understand that it's going to take some time potentially to get some answers to some of those questions. I do, with the rest of the council, support a continuing discussion on what we think we might like to do. I personally think 3009 is not the route to take to Interstate 10. I think that it's probably a great deal less expensive for 1103 to continue. Because you're not right at the creek bed where 1103 comes across. I could be wrong on that one as well, and I do think it would be a lot less expensive to align 1518. So just rather than give direction this evening, I think an ongoing conversation over the coming weeks or months, considering what little we've done to date, is really warranted for a decision of this magnitude. And with that, I'll stop talking. Mr. Edwards.
Maybe we should have a conversation with the MPO and find out what they're thinking about 3009 as well as 1518, because I can tell you after yesterday's MPO, I don't know if a toll road is going to happen in Cibolo. I'm not sure, but I'm just saying I think maybe we need to have that conversation. If it's not on the forefront, maybe we can put it on the front of their minds to look at that as an alternative.
If
Please,
I may, Mayor,
Mr. James.
I think your point was very well taken, and I think even with the rest of council's comments, we didn't necessarily show up here with this item. First time we've talked about it with some on council and expect, give us the blessing to spend $1.5 million. I think we perceive this as a series of conversations that we're probably coming back to you every few months. But frankly, I think there has been that debate of, do we need an extension or not? And if the general feeling of council was, no, it's too much trouble, don't need it, we can leave it. If what we heard generally is, we see why this would be something potentially we would need, there are some obstacles we need to deal with, then it gives us the ability to go back and again come back probably every 2 or 3 months with a bit more. A couple of things I will say, and this maybe to keep in mind, that we likely will come back with, is we'll likely come back and talk a little bit about when we did the thoroughfare plan, some of the traffic counts and traffic studies that we did, because I think, we talked about this today even, I think the hardest thing for a community to do in my 20 years is envision why we need to preserve the right-of-way for a road that doesn't exist there today, that isn't going to be needed for 30 years. Even if you've got an existing dirt road and you go, it's going to need to be bigger, that's easier because there's something good. But it's hard to see where there's not a road or an extension. I think that's a typical thing in terms of communities. And so what we would say, maybe a couple things to keep in mind to chew on, is that it's interesting when we talk about, well, what if we did 1103 or what if we did 1518? And I think from a staff perspective, the conversation we're going to come back, we need to do all of those. And so again, a hard thing to do, as much as we think back, and Mayor, I think you made a good point. Remember what Schertz Parkway originally was versus a field and what it is today. So again, and that's a good point, imagine when we're 80,000 people, not 40. Imagine when Cibolo is 90,000 people, not 30. Imagine when Marion is how many thousands of people. If you've seen the SCUC ISD presentations, look at their challenges to deal with growth on the other side of I-10. It's just hard to envision that. Even when we look back and I think about my dad taking me out to learn to drive on 1604, because it was a two-lane road 35 years or so ago, it's hard to envision that. And so I think you're right. And as we worked with TxDOT on the 1518 problem, we have a real challenge of making that a direct flyover connection because of Randolph, because of the railroad tracks, because of the floodplain. And so the best example I'd give you is think about Wurzbach Parkway that exists in San Antonio now, where you can get on 35 and how far you can go. Well, I remember growing up in that area, Wurzbach Parkway, it stopped at Lock Hill Selma. There was nothing on the other side, and that was 30 years ago. And so I think that's the challenge. So again, I would agree. I think we need to be thoughtful because we've got limited resources. We weren't looking for a be-all, end-all. And I will say part of that is going back to TxDOT, who at one point said, hey, this road needs to extend City of Schertz, and it just wasn't the right time. Working with the MPO, because if it doesn't get on their radar, we're probably fighting a losing battle. So we think it's a series of conversations, and this was really about it. And there probably are some other options we can do going forward. So I think good points, something for you to think about. John, if you want to add anything, but I think we'll come back every few months as we move it along and tell you what we found.
My initial reach out to TxDOT before this presentation this evening indicated that this is on their radar. It may not be on a list, but it is on their radar screen. They're looking to us, the City of Schertz, to provide some initial guidance, and they're more than willing to partner with us to try to move it forward. I agree with what Mr. James said. I didn't expect that we would solve the entire issue this evening. I tried to write down everything that you brought up, Mr. Mayor, so
I can tear it off right here and hand it to you if you like.
Okay. And if there's any other
if you can read that mess.
Excuse me. If there's any other research you want us to do or information you want us to gather, please let us know. I'm more than happy to do that research and keep providing you more information so you can make a better informed decision.
Tell you what, before we go a few months, if this indeed is at least in the minds of some of the folks in our region at TxDOT, if the council wouldn't object, why don't we invite them here to one of our council meetings? Let's set up a workshop and let's hear the thoughts that TxDOT has about not only 3009, but about the region. Let's start the education process, because I'm older now and I don't learn as quickly, but I would like to have a plethora of information, and starting with TxDOT's view, which is a wider perspective than I think any of us have in a single city, would probably be very valuable. And once we have that view from TxDOT, then it's probably valuable for us to visit with the local appointees to the MPO that we know, Mr. Haddis, Judge Kutcher, Commissioner Webb, et cetera, and see what they see and what they think as members of the MPO Executive Board. But let's start with TxDOT and their view and have them share some information with us. The sooner the better. Because while we may be in different positions on the dais about where the routing might be or whether or not it needs to tee and turn left and go this direction, I do think all of us want to have as much information as we can and continue the discussion. So nobody's looking at me like I'm crazy. So if you would, let's invite TxDOT to come talk to us about what they see and what they envision. Okay? All right. Very good. Thank you all, and thanks for bringing this back before the City Council. Next, let's go back one bullet, if we may, and revisit our Resolution 19R35, which is a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the approval of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for fiscal year 2017 to 2018, and other matters in connection therewith. I believe that Mrs. Frazier has some information for us, as well as Mr. Walters. Good evening to both of you. How are you?
Good evening. Doing well. Have a presentation by our auditor, Debbie Frazier from Armstrong Vaughn & Associates, going over the annual financial report.
Very good. Thank you. And microphone's all yours.
Good evening. We met actually with the Finance Committee and the City Manager, as well as your interim City Manager from last year, Brian, last Tuesday after your council meeting, and went over the report very thoroughly. So you're just going to get a quick synopsis tonight. The independent auditor's report basically is we follow standards, the generally accepted auditing standards, as well as the governmental auditing standards. And the purpose is to form an opinion on your financial statements. You received an unmodified opinion, which means after adjustments, your financial statements are fairly stated and materially correct. I'm going to skip this. The MD&A is basically written by, from the city's point of view. It's very interesting if you'd like to spend some time looking at it later. Your governmental-wide financial statements are based on, or full accrual, and they include your fixed assets, your debt, and your compensated absences, and your net pension liability, and then the new thing this year is an other post-employment benefit liability, which is your retiree health insurance and your TMRS liability for your sudden death. That's just the retiree portion, not the employee, but the retiree portion. Your governmental activities at the end of the year were $115 million at September 30th. Your net position increased by $9.6 million, primarily due to increases in capital grants, contributions, and receipts from permits. Your water system, your assets exceeded their liabilities by $97.7 million. Your unrestricted net position increased by $12.8 million to $33.2 at the end of the year. Much of this was due to 3.1 capital contributions, and then your expenses decreased in all areas, and you have some unspent bond funds. Your Schertz EMS exceeded their liabilities by $690,000 at September 30th. Your unrestricted net position increased by $47,000 to $475,000 at year end. This is a synopsis of your net position. Again, it's full accrual. And you'll see that your total net position was $115 million, and you had almost 2.4 in unrestricted. In the governmental, that's the first column. And then the second column is your unrestricted net position, your business type activities. And you had $98.4 million in that, and $33.5 was unrestricted. The general fund's fund balance at the end of 2018 was $15.6 million. The combined fund balances for all your funds were $53.8. These funds include your capital projects funds, your debt service funds, your EDC, and some smaller individual non-major type funds. Your unassigned fund balance for the general fund was $12.6 million, or approximately 6 months of average operating expenditures. The GFOA recommends you have at least 3 to 6 months. Fund balance for the general fund increased by $2.7 million due to increased sales and property tax receipts this year. Your combined fund balance increased $4.7 million, primarily to the debt. The breakdown of your fund balance at the end of the year, and again at the very bottom, second line up, you'll see you have unassigned fund balance of $12.5 million. And then you have restrictions on various fund balances, like 17.8 for your economic development money there. A good amount of that. and then you have 16 million in capital improvement. This is a breakdown of your budget and actual funds just for the general fund. I'm just going to say your total revenues, you brought in 2.2 million more than you expected. And again, if you look at the variance, 1 million was from your tax revenue and 693,000 was from your I'd like you to look midway up at the excess of revenues over expenditures. You'll see that you budgeted for a loss of 1 million, almost 2 million, 1,969,000. You actually had an excess of 2.3 million. And that variance was 4,270,000. Your net change in fund balance over the course of the year total was 2,660,000. It increased from 12,009,000 to 15.6 at the end of the year. And again, you have 6 months of operating. Net pension liability and related ratios. I have 2 items highlighted. I'd like you to look at the net investment income over the course of the last 4 years. If you'll remember, GASB 68 came into effect 4 years ago. We did a large prior period adjustment and put it on your book. The GFOA recommends that anything over 70% is considered rate. So you have 77.8% in total pension liability funded. And again, you look at that last line, you had 72% you dipped because they had a change in actuarial assumptions, and then you're on the rise, and that should go up every year. This is the new item in your financial statements. I did not print the TMRS retiree portion. Is slightly lighter, smaller in amount. I thought this one was a little more interesting. So you had a total OPEB liability that you had to put on your financial statements this year of $2 million. And you'll see a prior period adjustment on your financials this year because GASB 75 was effective for this year. Any questions on that? This is based on an actuarial study you have performed every 2 years. This is your 5-year trend analysis, and I'm going to let you look at that. And if you have any questions, I'll answer it. But during that, while you're looking at it, I'd like to thank James and his staff. They put up with us for over a week here, and then we are invasive. We bother them quite a bit, and then after we leave, we bother them for another month or 2. We did have a letter of conduct, and I think it's in. Is that on there? The letter of conduct, the governance letter. So the governance letter is just basically a letter that tells you what your responsibilities are, our responsibilities. And we did have a couple comments this year, and we wanted to follow up on last year, so I'm going to skip to that page. So anyway, last year I had written you up for policies and procedures on internal controls for TMRS. The TMRS policy and procedure is now being followed. In August, you sent out to all TMRS employees a letter and asked that they check their accounts and make sure they were correct. And that was performed in August of 2008. Your cash reconciling items, you still have a few reconciling items that you need to go through. I'm hesitant to tell you to send them straight to the state because these occurred at a time you changed bank accounts, and so I think some of them may be duplicate checks, and they just need to be researched. And you've been very short on staff for a while, so that needs to be done. This year we had a little more difficult time reconciling capital assets and depreciation. We are going. This is not done on a monthly monthly basis. You know, your capital outlay is an expenditure on your governmental-wide statements. And so that has to be converted. And right now you have a lot of construction that occurs, and you actually had quite a few leases that you entered into this year. So this was a little more difficult to reconcile this year, and we're asking that you consider reconciling it on at least a quarterly basis. So at the end of the year, it's easier to reconcile. And you might consider having your accounts payable clerk flag the transaction as they're entered into Encode and send them over to the gentleman who prepares the reconciliation. And then we had just one small comment on rental deposits. They weren't being tracked at the end of September 30th, but they now are in the process of determining whether just a spreadsheet will be good or another program. So anyway, those were my comments. You met all requirements on the Public Investments Funds Act. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Council, questions. Mr. Edwards?
I have two questions. Number one, James, do we have a time frame for when the reconciliations will be completed and tasked out?
For which section, the rental deposits or the capital assets?
Well, I have a question about the rental deposits too. Should I ask that first as well? Rental deposits, you mean of the municipal facilities like the Civic Center, the ball fields, all of those things, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're tracking those now.
We're tracking those now. They're in a spreadsheet format. This time last year, we started creating a new process to actually keep track of them in Encode, which would take out some of the human error and force staff basically to go through a structured process and tracking process whenever they're handling a contract. The person that was working on that left the city before he completed it, and actually a few months before this, we had one of our new employees start that process back up, and we expect it to be done and start implementing it by the end of April.
I have a question about succession for your particular position. You walk out. Have you trained someone for your particular job? If you were to just walk out, or you got hit by a truck, I mean, I'm asking for a reason.
We have the new assistant finance director has come in, has performed very well so far, and catching up very quickly, and that will be the designated person at this time.
Okay, so the reconciliation, you guys have that scheduled for those items that you said you thought were duplicate checks?
So that one is, we're working on the bank reconciliation part, and that's what we've been working on for the past year. One of the reasons we had trouble with the reconciliation of capital assets, the exact same people were working on the capital assets that they were in previous years, usually do a mid-year review. That person was actually pulled to start doing the bank reconciliation and improving our processes there. So we did not do that mid-year review, which made it more complicated when we got to the end of the year. Okay. Those have been on our radar for a while, and we will be looking at that. We'll have that starting to reconcile and get that off. We're actually going to submit some of this to the state, and that's going to be the start of the cleanup process for some of the older items that are outstanding.
Thank you.
Because these items that she mentioned were from the previous bank, are back from about 2002 timeframe, and so we're going back and cleaning up our books.
But James, your assistant director is working on the reconciling issue, right?
Yes, working currently on updating the bank reconciliation process.
Okay, so we have someone dedicated to that task.
Okay, Dr. Scagliola?
Yeah, I just wondered, how many years has Armstrong Vaughn been doing our books for us? Our audit. 11 years. Oh my gosh, that's
previously. This is 11 years in a row, and they were previously before that.
That's wonderful. So you do have an in-depth knowledge of our city finances. That's wonderful. Yeah, I met one of your predecessors recently, so I know you change staff periodically. You said something interesting about the delta of something like $4.2 million between our projected and our actual revenues. based on a city our size, given our budget, is that a common occurrence to have a delta so large? Okay. Oh, did they? Okay. So just one other thing. We have a reserve that we set at 26%. Based on the $12 million that's in there now, I know we have at least a couple of $1 million spoken for, which leaves us about $10 million. Would you consider that a very healthy reserve at this point?
Well, yes. I have a very healthy reserve. That's the GFOA recommends. But, 3 to 6 months.
Okay, is it the 26% that they recommend, or?
No.
That's our policy. What was general recommendation?
3 to 6 months.
3 to 6 months. Oh, okay. 25, 50. Yeah, all right. Sounds like we're in the ballpark then. Hey, I thank you so very much. Thank you for coming by.
Anyone else? Mr. Gutierrez.
A couple of things. Most cities. This is our report card, more than less. Most cities fail, and they file for bankruptcy because they dip into the pension fund. And it's great to see that our pension fund went from 71% to 78% funded. So that's a good occurrence there.
It is, but your pension, the state of Texas for cities has a different type of pension fund. You deposit those funds, and they are a trust fund that holds these funds.
Other than Detroit or
Right.
other places.
And so so you fund those annually, and then they give you a rate annually when they perform their.
As to where we're at that point. Okay. Now you also indicated that your findings last year is that our employees didn't view their statements. So how often are they being notified to look at their TMRS statement?
They are in August. They were in August of this year. Typically, if I were an employee and it was my retirement, I would be looking to make sure that they had, in my case, a female and my age right, because those are the statistical information and assumptions that go into making sure you get the right liability. So, I would encourage an employee to look at that anyway. The reason that we made this recommendation was not only this city, but they had you generally fill out the form and then it's faxed to TMRS. So your employees put none of that data in to the TMRS system. And so when we were just checking the census data, we were finding sometimes a female was.
It's re-entered incorrectly, I guess, right?
And so anyway, the date of birth, there must have been a glitch in their system because there were several employees who were born in 1963 that were obviously born in 1936. And based on the age, because the census data has the age, and so when we were looking at that, if somebody was, we would think they were 52, but their age said like in their 70s. So we went back to your personal files and let's make sure it's up to date.
Are we asking them to just review it once a year, or do we? Okay, once a year. Okay.
It should be fixed.
Okay.
Each employee gets a statement at least once a year that shows our TMRS contributions, and it lays out our whole program. That's a perfect time for every employee to go in and annually review that. It tells you how much the city has contributed to your fund. What it doesn't tell you, it tells you how much the city has contributed, but it doesn't tell you the whole picture of how much is in your fund. You have to call them to actually get both what the city has contributed and what you have contributed. So
there's
quite a bit of difference.
There's a couple of other facts that you didn't touch on, but I think are interesting for the public to know, is that we had an economic growth of 2.6%. And also that our unemployment rate was at 3.7, and I just found out today we dropped to a 3.2 unemployment rate. So those are all great numbers that we have here in the city. And I just want to thank you for looking at our books and telling us we're okay.
The statistical section at the back, I know every year I tell you that, that's one of the most fascinating parts of the audit. It gives you 10-year history. And so, and it just is very interesting to see the tax rate and the population, the median income. And that's where you, I think, saw the unemployment rate. So the principal taxpayers in 2009 compared to the principal taxpayers this year, they've changed considerably. And then on the TMRS, I just want to add I think it slipped my mind, but the TMRS is basically, the employee should be checking their own.
Yeah, to make any changes to, like that she mentioned, the age or sex of the employee, the city cannot be the ones to tell TMRS it's wrong. So in the letter that we sent out, it was informing them that, hey, check this amount, and if it's wrong, here's the form to fill out and send into TMRS so they can fix it. That's how our process.
All right, anyone else? For anyone that's curious, I encourage you to go and we have these either online or we have hard copies at the city. Go back and look when you have nothing else to do in your spare time between midnight and 6 a.m. and look year to year at the comments that have been generated by our auditors and the place where we look the last 10 years, maybe look the last 20 years. See the progress that's been made by the staff over time. That really is the measure of the work that we're doing or failing to do. And I think if you take a look at those, you'll be rather pleased with what you find, both with the consistency of recommendations being made by our auditing firm about ways we can improve and the consistency in the way that staff has responded to those recommendations and put them into place. Not all cities do. Sometimes it's a bit of a sawtooth look. Sometimes they wax and wane over time. I would say that in the aggregate, our performance over time and our regular improvement stands out amongst other cities. So thank you very much, as always, for joining us and for the work that you all do. Mr. Walters, thank you for what you and the department do for us. We're not just solvent, we're in strong shape.
All right. I'd just like to congratulate James and his staff. James really quarterbacked this and make sure the numbers are right. So congratulations, James. It's a very excellent report.
Very good. All right.
We all came together to make sure that keep track of everything. Even if it takes us a little bit longer to get all the fixed assets in place, we did track them all down. So.
Absolutely. Anyone else? We good? All right. Thank you all very much. I do appreciate it.
For a resolution.
It is a resolution. So is there a motion then to approve Resolution 19R35?
So moved.
Second. A motion from Mr. Edwards, a second from Mr. Davis. Any comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays. The motion carries. Thank you all once again. Appreciate it. All right, next up we have workshop and discussion and possible action regarding annexation and the associated delayed annexation development agreements. This should be very interesting discussion.
Okay, good evening. I'm going to be talking about the annexation and the associated delayed annexation development agreements that are going to be expiring over the next couple of years. So a little background, in early 2010, the city of San Antonio released around 3,500 acres of its extraterritorial jurisdiction to the city of Schertz. City Council then accepted the land into the city of Schertz ETJ and started the annexation proceedings in August of 2010. From 2010 to 2011, the city of Schertz annexed a large number of properties in northern Schertz, up around the northern part of I-35, and in southern Schertz, east of 1518 and north of I-10, totaling around 4,000 acres. As part of the annexation proceedings, all qualifying landowners were offered delayed annexation development agreements. In order for the land to be eligible for a development agreement, a portion or all of the land had to be appraised for tax purposes as land for agricultural, wildlife management, and or timberland uses. A majority of these landowners signed and entered into 10-year development agreements with the city in 2010 and 2011. And all the properties that did not enter into a delayed annexation development agreement, whether the property owners chose not to or they didn't qualify for the tax exemption, all those properties were annexed into the city. So what we have here is some maps that will kind of display what our city was at the time when we went through these annexation proceedings, which specific properties we annexed and which ones we went through agreements with. So this darker color here is the Schertz city limits before the 2010 annexations, and this tan color is our ETJ. These properties in green are the properties that we were annexed in 2010, whether it was because they didn't want to enter into the agreement or they didn't qualify for the tax exemption, they were annexed. And these properties in purple were the ones that went into or entered into development agreements with the city. Looking at the same thing in southern Schertz, also in 2010, once again, this dark color is our city, this is our ETJ. The green properties are the ones we annexed into the city in 2010, and the purple ones are the ones we entered into development agreements with. In 2011, the majority of the annexation proceedings, these properties in green are the ones that were immediately annexed at the time, and then the vast majority of the development agreements in 2011 here, all these properties entered into agreement with the city. So currently there are a total of 80 agreements with the city, and under the terms of the agreements, the property owners are required to maintain their agricultural exempt land use. In order to sell any portion of the land, the property owner is required to give prior notice of the sale to the city and prior notice of the development agreement to the prospective purchasers. But over the course of the last decade, city staff has found it difficult to ensure that every agreement is being fulfilled. And after further review of the various agreements and property owner information provided by the county appraisal districts, several inconsistencies with the property ownership information have been found. So this is kind of just an example map that is in southern Schertz here, and these agreements are going to be expiring in August 2021. This is just detailing some property ownership information. So in green, these properties have the same ownership when they sign the agreement as they do today, according to the county appraisal districts. The properties denoted with yellow have had some sort of change in property ownership, whether that be they sold the land or whether it be the property was in a trust and it passed on to the children. The property ownership is just simply different than it was when they signed the agreement. And these properties here in red, we know subdivided, and therefore we're also in violation of the agreement. And this is just an example of kind of one of the challenges, which is maintaining ownership information. And again, this is just a small piece of all of the development agreements that are within, that we entered into with various properties, in which we found that several properties either violated the agreement by subdividing or potentially changing ownership or by even losing their agricultural tax exemption. And again, these are just some of the challenges that staff will face when trying to keep track of every property and whether they still conform to their original development agreement. Looking to the future, currently city staff is preparing to move forward with the annexation of these properties once their agreements respectively expire, as originally intended in 2010 and 2011, and as opposed to extending the agreement periods or opting to not annex the properties. Thank you.
Council, questions on this upcoming set of events? Mr. Larson?
I guess if you can go back to that last map.
This one?
Yeah. And I know this is a pretty basic question, but help me understand help me understand why it matters to a city if a property is in an agreement for 10 years to not be annexed versus it being annexed. Like, what's the benefit? Why is it so imperative that they get annexed?
I guess it's the original intent of why the city entered into the development agreements with these properties in 2010 to 2011 was they had the agricultural land use that was tax exempt and allowed them to be offered a development or delayed annexation development agreement. Mm-hmm. And I guess speaking back to reading the minutes and kind of going through the original intent back in those years, we're just proceeding with what the end goal of these development agreements was to eventually annex the properties. This map specifically is just a very small example of one of the challenges that I wanted to kind of illustrate that city staff has been facing with maintaining the validity of all these agreements still. This doesn't, if they're not green, this doesn't necessarily they meant they violated the agreement. It's just properties that we are unsure of without official city notification that they changed ownership information or that they subdivided, therefore potentially in violation of their agreement.
Okay, and I get that that was the original intention. I guess what I'm trying to get is why.
We'll tag team on it maybe on this one a bit. So I think, let me answer what I don't think is your question first, then I'll get to what I think your question is. So the reason they were offered the annexation agreement as opposed to just annexing them had to do with the requirements of state law and what we were obligated to do. Otherwise, likely, and I wasn't here, but most cities, you just go ahead and annex and get it done at the time. The reason that we would want to just annex these properties in the city as opposed to leave them out in the ETJ is a couple of things. Primarily as a city that, because these are in our ETJ, it's really the city saying these are properties that are going to be in our city limits in our future. And so we want to do a couple of things. One is we want to make sure that we have all the appropriate land use control tools to assure they develop in a way that's consistent with our comprehensive plan. So I think the next item on the agenda is going through our comprehensive plan, talking about the vision for our city. That's important to us for a couple reasons. Some of you may remember a few years ago where property owners who were on the other side of 35 around 482 came to us and lamented the fact that there were asphalt batch plants starting to come in. And they said, this is contrary to what we're about in terms of residents living in the area. We have truck traffic, we have noise, we have health concerns, we have just conflicts of uses. We've talked to the folks at JP2 High School about their concerns with some of those same sorts of things. So that's why we want to annex, because essentially it's in our ETJ, it's area we have sort of dibs on, and we've said you're going to be part of the city. We want to bring them in so that they fall under those same controls that everybody else does. And this is a little bit of the challenge, and we've talked about this before when we debated, and we certainly heard from, I think, Mr. Roberts on this to some degree. It's this issue of how much control and regulation does the city want to have? And often we'll hear people kind of lament saying, hey, I think you're being too heavy-handed. But frankly, you have also heard residents saying, hey, how come you're allowing this thing to occur next to me? It negatively impacts my property. And so that's really the main reason we do that, is so that we have the full control over the city. The reality is those people impact us as well. They use the roads that generally, as you can see, run through the city. As they develop, they will continue to be an impact on our road. To go back to 3009, and I think the mayor's comments in terms of, well, who's going to use it? One of the things we have to be concerned about is background traffic. The world does not stop at the edges of Schertz. So folks from San Antonio want to drive through Schertz, folks from Cibolo want to drive through Schertz, and we've got to deal with that. So it really allows us to have the full control of the property from a land use perspective, and then it also lets those people get services. Now, I would say you're not going to have a lot of those people standing up going, yeah, I want those controls over my property, I want to pay the additional city taxes, but now you pick up my trash service. But that's how it really works. And so from our perspective, the reason to annex is it lets us do it in an orderly fashion. Part of the problem, if we were to piecemeal it, is state law limits what we can annex in terms of having to be contiguous to the city. So one of the challenges becomes is you'll have somebody come in and say, hey, I want to annex, or I'm under this agreement. Well, if we don't bring in the properties next to where the city is, then I don't have that ability to annex, and then we're forced to say, then I have to give up control, and then I get that locally unwanted land use that we don't have, and it sort of all falls apart. So part of the reason you do it in mass is to have an orderly way to occur as opposed to you get stuck. And what we often find is most of the developers are coming in, they want to be in the city. They're marketing homes to folks who want to be in suburban style. They want to be in the city of Schertz or the city of Cibolo. They're dealing with the same issues. And so that's part of what it is. But if we don't do it wholesale, we may lose the ability, in fact, to annex some of these properties or to maintain the controls over the development agreement.
I guess, so the reason I'm confused because my understanding is that if they're not annexed now, and it's because they have that ag exemption, and if they were to do any type of development or change to land use, they would be required to be annexed. So for me, as this is what I'm trying to understand, because I think the mayor kind of addressed this indirectly to me a little bit, in that we're talking about having a more open space on that in that part of Schertz, and it seems to me that annexation actually decreases the opportunity to keep the open space, whereas keeping it in the agricultural use, they can't change from agricultural use unless they agree to annexation anyways.
So the development agreement in theory gives us that ability, but the thing that really gives us that ability to keep it in an agricultural state or in a rural state, is the better way to phrase it, is having zoning controls.
So how does the current agreement that says they can't do X make it harder for us to say you can't do X than if they were annexed?
Sure. So a couple things. Practically speaking, if when somebody violates the terms of the agreement, and the attorney, Dan, is probably cringing going, yeah, it's not the right legal word, you've watched Law and Order, but you don't, it's not an appropriate use. But when somebody were to sell the property and they're supposed to come to us, or they start building something on the property, or they change the use, what has to happen for us to enforce that is we've got to know about it. And the problem we have is we don't know that. You know, right now we struggle now, and some of you have been there where we've talked about vested uses. Well, when did it start? How long has it been there? We're asking all the folks who've been around a long time, hey, do you remember when this thing maybe came on, or we're checking water bill records? That's part of the reason. So it's this system that works in principle or in theory, but as you can see, we've got these properties that, yeah, till we ran this exercise.
Well, I guess, and this is where I'm trying to understand the difference, because that's true whether you're annexing the city or not, right? In order for you to make sure they're doing things the right way, you have to know they're doing them.
But if they're in the city, then I can check to verify that they pulled all the appropriate permits. It becomes more difficult for us if they're not in the city. So for instance,
so I guess
right now if somebody changes ownership, if you're in the city, you can buy or sell a piece and you don't have to notify us, don't have to tell us. It doesn't make we don't care really. Out here, because of the agreements, we do. And so part of it becomes this issue, I think, of how long do we kick the can down the road? And because we have to annex contiguously, if we extend this stuff, we get somebody who comes in, and literally, I could have this next month. I could have somebody walk in under a development agreement. They're changing the use, and I don't have the ability necessarily to bring them in because they're not contiguous. And I think that's just some of the practical realities of it that you don't fully think through. But the idea was, when we did this, look, we're going to annex in now. If you are eligible and want to do the agreement, we'll do it. We'll give you 10 years, but we're bringing you in. And now we resolve that problem by annexing everybody at the same time. They're in the city. They're under our control. And you as council have the ability to say, for example, like in this area, the density of this area, and it's probably further south here, is 1 unit per 5 acres. That's what the plan calls for. So you have the ability to control that.
Well, and I'm going to stop you because I have a question for learning purposes about what you said before. So theoretically, if somebody who's in one of these agreements sold a portion of their property, didn't tell you, and that portion is not contiguous to our city limits, and they wanted to build a tire factory or whatever, whatever ridiculous example we want to think of, the city would not have the ability to enforce the agreement because it was not contiguous?
We can try to enforce the agreement, okay? I think not being contiguous poses a challenge. Let me give you the bigger issue with that. Somebody goes and says, hey, I want to buy this piece of land. You're not in the city. You're in the city's ETJ. So there's no zoning control. Person who says it, so yeah, that's the case. They sell them this piece of land. That person then goes to the county to pull a building permit, because if you're in the ETJ, you don't have to go to the city normally to pull building permits, and makes an investment. And we've heard, and you have an item coming up about what happens when and then we kind of go out there and go, wait, what's going on? They're trying to build something. That's under a development agreement. What happened? That person who bought that property knew nothing about this agreement. They may have civil recourse against the person, but that's part of the challenge with these development agreements is, I don't doubt that we've got people who bought these who have no idea that they're under this agreement. And the longer we go, the more development pressure we get, the bigger problem that's going to be. Because the irony is the next item we have on this agenda was prompted, frankly, by a bunch of these folks going, hey, we need you to change your plan, and we need you to provide infrastructure at a different level so that we can do this other thing with it. And council may choose to do that, you may not, but that becomes a good example of the problem we have with these things sitting out there in our ETJ when you've got the development pressure we've got, which is you have these unexpected things. And it frankly, to me, becomes this issue of, we've already made the statement to say we want to control what happens with your property when we entered into this agreement. And as much as there may be a struggle with that, I don't know that anybody on council is saying, yeah, let's just pull back on that and let what happen may happen. Because again, we get another thing like we get with the asphalt batch plants. Some of you may remember the Pride Rock development that came in that Rhine Valley that beat it in, and now we've got higher density than we normally do. And so part of it is the fact that we've said this is our ETJ, I think gives us an obligation to all of those other property owners to say, we're going to use our powers to control land use, to provide for infrastructure, and everything there. It really, in my mind, is a contract. We typically hear people lamenting that they don't want to be in. But again, as you remember, we had a bunch of people show up here saying, can't you do something about these batch plants off 482, city? And I think maybe you passed a resolution saying we're concerned about it, but we couldn't stop it. And I think those folks probably said, why? That's part of the give and take with this.
And so, okay, so that explains a lot of the things I had questions. The follow-up then is the opposite end of that. So those are the challenges that we face if we don't annex. What are the challenges we face if we do annex?
So in my opinion, there are a couple of things we do. When we annex property, there's a certain obligation to start trash service immediately, for example. But that's doable. We have a contract with it. They have use of city facilities immediately. The other thing is those folks now are in the city, and they probably have a higher expectation with regard to police protection and fire protection that we're obligated to provide. And what I would argue is that we're making that investment now. We were just at the HOA meeting, and we heard that again about folks who are in the city down there wanting that level of service. Well, the problem is if you have this checkerboard pattern, then it becomes a real issue for us of how do I provide that level of service to the folks who are in the city when I've got all this land that's not in the city. And so to some degree, it's consistent. And so I think it makes sense in terms of there is a right time to annex and a right time not to. But we have such development pressure down here from a staff perspective, this is obvious. I think what we would likely say is that, and I'll see if I can get back with Nick's tricky map here, some of the areas you see up here, it's probably not time to. There's not the development pressure. We don't have the infrastructure as close. It's not the same sort of issues, which is why some of those decisions were made. But I think from a staff perspective, the main thing is we patrol those areas. But as you hear, we often have agreements that come forward with the police department, with the fire department, that we help provide service for these areas as is, and they're not in the city and they don't pay taxes for it. You know, the other is that I think folks have, and this, I'll be blunt, is they now can vote. Those folks not in the city, they have no say who sits up here on council that makes decisions that impact them. When you annex them in, they are now your constituents who vote for you. Not that council would look at them and say, I don't care what you think, but it gives them that power to vote and actually be part of that process. It lets them sit on city boards and commissions, and in most cases they can't. It lets them run for city council and be part of that decision-making process. I think too often people look solely at taxes and controls as a bad thing as opposed to the flip side of it.
Thank you. You kept telling why we should annex, and you didn't answer the challenges. But I get the point is that you're saying the challenges.
The big challenges are PD and fire.
Yeah.
Is that at this point,
so providing the service to
those residents have an expectation to say, hey, you have to provide service as you do a similarly situated area. And I think there's a higher expectation if you're in the city limits right here than if you're not.
Understood.
That's the real challenge is PD and fire.
And you think we're in a position where we can fulfill those obligations?
And what I would say is, again, here's how I would phrase it. And the chief is probably cringing on this one. We've got rural areas, and we have crime, we have issues, we have emergencies that occur. And oftentimes we'll hear people say, well, I'm concerned about that new development going in, this retailer or that retailer, because that's going to be crime. Well, crime tends to follow people. If you've got nobody there, would you agree, Chief? Yeah. Where you don't have anybody, there aren't a lot of people to do things. When you bring a bunch of people together, you have the opportunity. And so it's not about annexation it's as this stuff starts to develop, we then will have to start ramping up, adding officers and adding things like that. But that occurs whether we annex or not.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Dr. Scagliola.
Oh, Brian, you sat down way too soon. Yeah, just to carry on what Councilmember Larson was saying, I want to take it to the next level. So you're saying we do have the resources available to service these communities as promised.
So you're right, Council, and let me be clear. And so here are a couple things, and I want to be very clear what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. And this probably will not be popular, and some of the residents who live in this area, next time I see them, are going to go, hey, let me have a conversation with you. But I'll take as an example the folks who moved out in Laura Heights, the first phase, or Schertz Forest. They're in the city, but they moved out way away from everything. So I doubt that those folks really expected to have the same necessarily response time as the folks who moved into Mesa Oaks, who are right there a stone's throw from the police and the fire department. That's the reality of it. And so I think most folks in the city look when they move and say, this is how far I am from a fire station, and if I'm right next to it, I'm going to get a quicker response time, and if I'm moving into an area further, it's going to be a longer response time, and it's going to take the city a while to grow. The issue now, if you think about it, is if they're out here and they're under a development agreement in their ATJ and there's a police thing, it's the county sheriff who responds as first priority to that, and how long does that take? As opposed to us having to patrol areas, and we hear from residents how we should, but having this area all in the city limits as opposed to a checkerboard pattern allows us to more efficiently deliver services, lets us collect some revenue, and gives us those land use controls. Because, again, when you remember when planning runs a zoning case, and if you pull the item that I think we have one person who's waiting for a couple items on the agenda and sitting about 3 hours a meeting to get to, it talks about impact on infrastructure. So when we talk about zoning cases, we look at what's the impact on infrastructure and can we manage it. And so what I'd say is, yeah, our police department is serving this areas in the city now, as is our fire department. Bringing those properties in, it adds a bit more, but in my mind, it's part of this. It's part of this step in providing a better level of service. And so again, as I said before, the area way up on the other side of 35, we're not recommending you let's go annex them in now because we aren't ready.
Right, and the thing is, we've had 10 years to develop the services that are available to them. You know what? Quite frankly, I don't have a problem with annexing the entire area. It would solve a whole lot of problems. Okay, the problem I have is, okay, now these people are going to have to pay for services that they may or may not be receiving. Taxes. I'm not a big fan of taxes, but generally speaking, taxes compensate for services rendered. That I can deal with that to a certain extent. But if they're not getting the services as promised, why are they paying the taxes? Can we establish a mechanism so that, yes, indeed, you are annexed, but no, you're not paying the full rate that the other residents are?
So here would be the challenge I would see with that. So legally, per state law and per the annexation, we're required to provide services. When this moves forward, and it happens, Chief's telling his officers, hey, all the stuff we've been talking about and where I've been having y'all drive to look at, that annex goes into effect. It's ours now. So we have to provide a level of service. I can guarantee you that every resident or property owner in Schertz probably could point to one city service and go, I don't use that. And not to embarrass folks, but how many people here are residents of Schertz and have not used our library within the last year? Okay, all right, there we go. Okay, a couple honest ones, thank you very much. So they're not using that service, but you're paying for it. And so that's the reality of it, is that council decides what services at what level, and the community pays for it. If they don't think we should be doing that, they can stand up and say that. But I think it becomes really problematic to tell some residents, some property owners, you don't have to pay for all the services that everybody else has to. If we think we are providing more services that people need and should be paid for, then maybe we need to revisit that. But that becomes the issue, is how you tell everybody else here, you've got to pay for everything. These folks were not going to make it. That's the flip side. I can appreciate that.
Yeah, you did a really good job with that. The other thing is, I was wondering if you're going to take this in phases, annex those south of 78 first, or the entire city all at once. What's the strategy going forward?
They'll have to be annexed as their respective agreements expire. It's going to come in basically 2 different phases: late summer of 2010 and then late summer of 2011. Obviously, the decision wouldn't be like 2010 versus the 2011 annexations. You would make the decision to annex before all of them, but they would come in 2 phases.
Even the ones up towards Garden Ridge area, which we may not be able to service fully with between now and next year.
To be clear, the ones under the annexation agreement, we can.
Okay.
We still have properties not covered under an annexation agreement, primarily up there. But yeah, Mama, we're not ready to bring them. The ones under annexation agreements, if you go back. So if you look at these areas, these are areas that are fairly close in. We've got development activity. We have parklands that's kicking around. They had a zoning case just come to deeper into space. So all of this stuff is in that hub of development. What I'm not talking about bringing in is this poor guy up here that I don't know how we get to it, don't know where we get to it, don't know what's going on. That stuff we're not ready to yet, and that's where I would say, I think, go with Councilman Larson. I don't know how I justify that.
But the plan would be to annex all,
The plan
right?
would be eventually to annex all of those properties.
Well, but I mean, all of the development
All the
agreements.
development agreements,
Not,
yes.
not,
So all the purple.
not all the ETJ, just all the development agreements.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's all I have now.
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, just a quick comment on the taxation. Don't forget that if you have an ag exemption, it remains in place. It doesn't go away just because we annex it. So if that farmer keeps his property in ag, they're virtually paying no taxes anyway. So it's not like you're going to add an extra burden. You're only going to add that burden on their homestead.
Yep, Mr. Edwards?
How many properties are we looking at that for annexation, total number?
For the development agreements, it's approximately 80. We're having a hard time with the specific amount based on the different property owners that are now involved with the subdivision of the land and the original ones.
So can you go back to the slide where you show the properties that have been changed? So we got, so what's the number of the properties that have been actually changed or subdivided or some item? I think it's 16, right?
What's that?
The items, each one of these.
This is just a small piece.
Okay, so
there's several more properties. This is just a small piece of Southern Schertz, and these are specifically the agreements that are expiring in August of 2021. This is just as an example to show you kind of what challenges we are facing.
Okay, so but do we have a number of how many properties have changed?
So we don't have an exact number of the properties that have specifically violated their agreement because we're not quite sure exactly what that change means. This was just preliminary research to show you how hard it is to kind of to keep track of everything specifically, because they could have been, the ownership could have been changed in a number of different ways, not just straight selling of the entire land.
And so I think maybe, Councilman, if I may, part of the benefit of this is that the general direction of council is proceed as we decided 10 years ago, and staff will start putting in that time, putting all that down. And so if you ask us 6 months from now, and Nick can get up there and go, yep, this many, here they are, here's what.
Okay. So if I'm looking at this, if I'm just doing a quick number here, I'm looking at 16 or 20 out of 80. We're looking at about 20%, basically. We've upheld our portion of the agreement. Would you agree?
I'd say overall, the percentage of people that we have identified a potential change in, not necessarily a violation, but a potential change is around half of the 80. in the whole northern and southern Schertz.
So now we're at 50%. Okay, so if we're at 50%, and we came to them with agreements in hand years ago, and we protected people in southern Schertz from a developer that was coming in that was going to do some things that were just not conducive to what we were trying to build in the city of Schertz. It's not how we did business. We actually protected people from that, okay? If that's the case, if we've held up our part of the agreement, I think we move forward. We have to move forward. I don't think we pick and choose. Also, I don't know why people are thinking that we don't provide services when we annex someone. We provide services when we annex. Yes, do they pay for services? Yes, but we provide that service as well. It may be scattered, it may be sparse, but we have to provide services. Police, EMS, trash, all those things have to be provided. Okay, thank you.
I don't see anyone else asking to comment, so it sounds to me, based on the discussion council has had, that we should move forward with the annexations per the development agreements we signed with all these property owners nearly a decade ago. I was on council at the time, and one of the reasons that we talked about in initially offering and signing the development agreements was to give the property owners at the time ample time, should they wish not to be annexed, to profitably dispose of their property and move so that they would be positioned where they wanted to be. A decade is a reasonable time for someone to find a buyer, to sell, and to relocate if that's what they wanted to do. And I think that the city has held up our side of the bargain, and I do think it is the will of council. If I properly ascertain, we're ready to move forward per the agreements we signed with the original property owners. Okay? All right. You don't need a specific vote or anything. You have what you need. Very good. I'd like to then jump to the consent agenda items this time, and maybe even the other items that we have on the agenda before we come back to the workshops. Items that we have on consent this evening. Item number 1, minutes, approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of March 12, 2019, and minutes of the special meeting of March 19, 2019. Item number 2, ordinance 19S10, an ordinance by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, approving a request to rezone approximately 2.5 acres of land from pre-development district PRE and general business district GB to general business district GB, located at 6486 IH35, City of Schertz, Comal County, Texas. This is second and final reading. Item number 3, ordinance 19S11, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, to approve a specific use permit to allow for operation of an automotive repair major land use at 6485 IH35, City of Schertz, Comal County, Texas. Second and final reading. Item number 4, resolution 19R31, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the pursuit of the Safe Routes to Schools Infrastructure Program funding for the construction of sidewalks and crosswalks near schools within the City of Schertz. Item number 5, resolution 19R32, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the city manager to enter into an interlocal agreement for fire protection services with Barra County and other matters in connection therewith. Item number 6, resolution 19R39, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing a subdivision improvement agreement Crossvine M1U3 Phase A and other matters in connection therewith. Item number 7, resolution 19R34, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the release and abandonment of a water line easement agreement which is no longer needed with Schertz-Cibolo Universal City Independent School District on the Samuel Clemens High School campus and other matters in connection therewith. Item number 8, resolution 19R36, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing an amendment and assignment to the agreement with the developer of the Halley's Cove subdivision project for sewer pump and haul. Item number 9, resolution 19R37. Resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing expenditures in excess of $50,000 with Susamaphone Marketing, LLC, for graphic design services for Schertz Magazine during the fiscal year 2018-2019. Other matters in connection therewith. Item number 10, resolution 19R38, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing an amendment to the contract with BB Inspections for inspection and plan review services and expenditures with BB Inspections totaling no more than $70,000 for building inspection services for the fiscal year of 2018-2019 and other matters in connection therewith. Are there any other items on the regular agenda that need to be added to the consent? There are none. Is there a motion to approve the items as presented on consent?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question about item number 9, if we could actually take that individually.
Okay, we'll pull item number 9. Is there a motion to approve items 1 through 8 and item number 10 on consent?
So moved.
Second.
Motion from Mr. Edwards, a second from Mr. Brown. Any other comments, questions from council? Hearing none, a call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes, no nays. Motion carries. Go to item number 9, Resolution 19R37. I've already read the caption. This is regarding expenditures in excess of $50,000 with Susamaphone Marketing LLC for graphic design services for the magazine.
I just have one question. It says 50,000, but then inside, when I look at the benefit of it, it says 80,000. Is that a mistype?
It's authorizing expenditures in excess of 50,000, but we're limiting it to
At 80. Okay, that's all I needed. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a resolution. I'd like to make a motion that we approve resolution number 19R37.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Edwards. I have a second from Mr. Davis. Other comments, questions from council? Hearing none, a call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes, no nays. The motion carries. All right, item number, I'm going to go ahead and go on with the discussion action items, and we'll come back to the workshops as we go. Item number 11 is ordinance 19M12. Ordinance by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, amending the City of Schertz Code of Ordinances and certain other ordinances by amending and establishing fees for certain licenses, permits, and other services provided by the City of Schertz. It's first reading. All right. Microphone is y'all's.
Behind me on this one. So here's the deal. As you guys know, because you've been getting a lot of probably emails and calls from residents about, hey, my meter, what's my billing meter, what's it looking like? Our current meters are past their warranty period, and we're starting to experience failures. So we went ahead late summer, I guess, and you approved an agreement to change those meters out with the new smart meters. And so we have undertaken that effort. We are about what percentage through now? 50%? 50%-ish going through of changing the meters out. A couple things to let you know, to remind you how the system worked. So the old meters weren't dumb meters, but the way the old meters worked is they send out a radio signal. We had our meter techs who drove around with laptops, and as they drove around through neighborhoods, it would pick up those signals and do those readings. And then they would take it, they'd download that in the office, and we'd run the billing cycle. Now, when we did that, we'd look and say, well, where did it not pick up? And then we'd have to send the meter tech back out, and the meter tech would have to go out and kind of get closer or look down and do a manual read, come back download it. The way the new system works is our meter techs don't have to do that anymore. That meter sends a signal out, or generally should. Meter sends a signal out. It reads, it downloads that information about twice a day or so. So again, we're getting it. Our residents will be able to look at what their usage is. We'll be able to look at, we'll be able to sort of pull that. If we're not getting it, it'll flag that. We can run out and go, what's the problem on this meter? And it does it the same radio wave. Some of you may have heard in other communities that there's been a concern of health issues that people have with these sort of radio signal meters. And I think because we've undertaken this fairly public effort, we've had some articles in the magazine, things like that, some folks have come forward. At this point, really, it's only been one and said, I have this health concern, I have this thing. Had a lot of conversations. Now, they were a bit surprised to learn, to understand, well, you realize your current meter is sending radio waves, and you realize that even in the future, everybody on either side of you and behind you will be sending out radio waves. It's just not your particular meter. But we can appreciate that to some degree. And so in the interest of trying to find, and I'll be blunt, a bit of a compromise, because the reality is if we said, we're not going to offer it, this is the meter, this is what you use, and that person strongly enough, you may have somebody say, then pull my meter, I don't want water. Well, you can't occupy a house without water, and now I've got this other issue. So we kind of looked at maybe how it could work. So we have the ability to get not the kind of meter we've got now, but a meter that sends out no signal. We hesitated whether or not to even offer this option. Just say, no, this is what we use, this is how to use. But ultimately we said, we're okay with it, but frankly, all the benefit of our system falls apart if I get a bunch of people not on a signal meter. And so I can appreciate the comment earlier. We chatted a bit about it. There's not really a big cost to get the new meter. It's extra effort for us. But what it means is I'm having to run somebody out every month, pull the cover off, read it, take note of it, bring it back, enter it into the system, and go forward. And so I've got the meter tech who's doing that, I've got the staff people that are doing it, I've got the manual. So while we're willing to do it, there is this ongoing every month cost for us to do it. And so what we came up with is a $50 a month charge. So if you really want it, we'll do it. But I'm not going to have the rest of the citizens of our community subsidize that particular thing for you, and I'm not going to make it, frankly, so low that I undo all the value, and now we're having to go out and manual read 200 meters every month. Part of it was set to make sure our other residents weren't paying for it. You got to really want it. If you want it, so be it. But hopefully we're not doing more than a dozen a month on manual read. But that's what this is for, is to try to, for those people who feel that strongly, we'll do this for you.
Dr.
To date,
Scagliola?
it's been one.
Okay, Dr. Scagliola?
I don't know. It just seems a little punitive. $600 per year. What's the meter cost?
So the meter cost is what the meter is. The charge is really, it's a $50 charge to get this meter, because I've got to go through the process of ordering one for you.
Yeah, the thing is, you wouldn't need to order one if they hadn't requested it. So
If
what's
they
the
hadn't
cost of the meter?
That's the meter. The big charge is $50 a month for us saying, what's it worth to us to disrupt our system and have somebody who runs out every month? And literally at this point it's one, so I got to tell a guy, this day, you drive up there, you bend down, you read it, you drive back, you then download the data, you work it in, you get it into the billing, and you run it sort of through.
Yeah, I can
I'm fine if you want to go 40, 30. We are hesitant to drop it, because if I get 200 people doing it, our benefit falls apart, that everyone's paying.
if you get that many.
If I get
But if you only get one.
Yep.
You know, quite frankly, I don't know what the scientific research is. I dealt with electronics a lot throughout my life, and I don't know if I had any side effects. We're not going to go there. But there are probably other ways to accomplish the same aim. You don't have to read the meter every month. If they're willing to have it read once a year and just do the averaging like other people do, that's one read a year for $600. I just don't get it. I really don't.
So here becomes my problem, Councilman. I can appreciate it. So a couple of things that we struggle with now, and you've all heard it. A couple of you have today heard it and heard. So it is a very flawed system to estimate usage. It's inherently off. And one of the issues becomes is particularly, and people don't always know this, and we dealt with this today to query, if the leak is on our side or our fault, we deal with that. But if you have a leak on your property and you didn't realize it because you never walked there, didn't see it, we know our park, we can't find all our leaks in Pickerel because they're dropping so far down, that resident still has to pay for it at a lower rate because there's a cost to our city. And so one of the issues becomes is, if I do it every year, here's this huge bill, are we going to get the money? Again, I think it becomes possibly good in theory, but in practice, it's problematic to show up and go, oh, here's your annual bill. That's far more than I thought. Or they've moved out and they shut down and I'm eating the cost. You know, we've talked about this. We have a very, staff disagrees, we have a very limited patience for bills not being paid. We in this community are fairly on the side of being quick to go, your bill didn't get paid. If you don't pay by this, we're cutting you off. We do that to eliminate people walking bills. We still write off a fair amount, but the longer we go, the more we're writing off and the more everybody here has to eat.
Well, you present a good argument. I still think it's punitive, but I guess we can walk away agreeing to disagree on this one.
But just to give you some perspective, in Alamo Heights, when we, not with water meters, but with power meters, the experience was about 1% refused to have the meter put in. So we've got much less than that so far. And we did the same thing, though. You know, we said, okay, if you want the old style manual meter, we're going to charge you a fee. I can't remember exactly what the fee was, but so it's not an uncommon thing when there's a cost to the city to ask that the resident who wants the, accommodation to pay a fee, whatever that might be.
Mr. Larson?
So I have a little different perspective. I don't think we offer it. I think it's a little ridiculous to offer it. I think this is the role of the Internet of Things and radio frequency signals. We're all going to die from them if there's a problem anyways. You're not going to stop it. Your microwave, your fridge, your phone, your shoes, your clothes, they're all going to send radio frequency signals in the next 5 to 10 years. We're a city of 40,000 people. We're not a small town anymore. We can't react to every request, every question, every complaint by codifying new ordinances. And I'm going to repeat myself in another conversation, but I'm going to go back to something I've said before. There's a book. It's called Orbiting the Giant Hairball, and I recommend it to everybody, by Gordon McKenzie. It's a business book written by some obscure Hallmark card writer, but the theme of the book is that every time Hallmark, as it grew, there would become these isolated incidents, right? These anomalies. And so Hartford would respond by creating an ordinance or a rule or a regulation or a policy. And he described each one of those as a hairball, and over time it just became this giant tangled mess the original purpose, it no longer served that purpose because they were so intertwined. And this is an example of that. We don't need the fee. We don't need to make the accommodation. Just kill it.
Yeah. So here is, and again, you'll be pleased, Councilman, I hope, that staff took frankly, it was a pragmatic approach. I think staff was of the position, we can't be doing this. Not worth it, don't want to do it. Per code, you have to have water and you have to have hot water. The problem becomes is if I have somebody who feels so strongly about this, it would not surprise me that they go pull my meter. Now I can be very justified in saying, then we're starting the process to get you out of your home. That will eat up so much time that it's worth it to run a $50, worth it to do the manual read meter. I'm being really blunt and really honest. The reason we are doing this is that if somebody feels that strong and says, I'll pay $50, I'll pay $100 a month, whatever it is, I don't doubt that person would say, pull my meter. And now we have this situation where we have to go through the process to get them out of the house. That's why we're doing it. Otherwise, they're...
Well, what if I want to remove my roof? What if I want to have a 5-car driveway? What's the monthly fee for that?
Sure.
I mean, I think I get your point, but you know me well enough that I'm more the oak tree than the reed. And if somebody says, well, if you don't do this accommodation for me, the 1 in 40,000, because of some loony article I read on Facebook, that I'm going to cause a stir. Okay, we'll deal with that when we get there, but this is a little crazy.
Article and this, that, and the other.
You didn't say that. I'll be on record as saying it. I don't care.
For us, this was really, and again, I'll certainly defer to council what you want to charge, whether you want to allow it or not. Staff, I think, was fairly pragmatic about it and said, we've got a bunch of really important stuff we're trying to do. Let's not get hung up on a bunch of stuff that's going to eat a bunch of time.
No,
this was the conclusion.
Brian, let me
reasonable,
again, in Alamo Heights, and I hate to belabor it, but we had the same issue with the power meters, and I believe that the people would have chosen not to have power to their house if we had said, you're going to have to take this, and Brian's right, that takes us down a path we really don't want to go. So it's given in, and it's making whether you agree it's reasonable or unreasonable, it's pragmatic, and I think that's the point.
Well, here's my
electricity to their house since January.
Well, I think that there's always going to be. That's the question then comes, where does it end, of course. But so my follow-up would be, fine, I'm not, this isn't a hill I'm willing to die on, but I would say either we make the accommodation or we don't. I don't think we need to codify a fee for it. Either we say, you know what, we're going to make the accommodation and it's done, and that's a staff decision that y'all make internally, and I don't care if you choose to or not, but I don't think we need to codify a fee and formalize a process where people are like, oh, I can opt out of this? Oh, great. I think we just, okay, fine. You came to my office. We've got a gentleman's agreement.
And so here would be the issue. If it came down to that, staff would say, then don't allow that as an option. It's hugely problematic to have it free for everybody. And I will be honest, part of what we are trying to do is, and this is the fairness, is things are codified. We take out that discretion from staff of, well, why do I get told I have to do this? Why do I not? And that's the reason for the fee schedule that we've got. So again, refer to council. We would say either don't do it or charge a goodly fee to keep a bunch of folks from doing it. And I'll
Well, then my third choice would be $50 isn't enough. That's not an hourly rate worthy of driving 20 minutes to the furthest end of Schertz, reading it, 20 minutes back, putting it in, plus the data that we lose, the opportunity to catch leaks that we lose, the fact that we're customizing it. I think in the order of preference, because like I said, it's not a whole down, in order of preference, say, too bad. If you don't want it, sorry, welcome to 2019. The second choice is you just make an agreement within staff. We don't need to codify anything. The third choice is why $50? Why not $150? That's what a lot of businesses charge hourly. It's going to take at least an hour to do it. $150 a month.
I'm going to make a motion from the chair that we approve ordinance 19M12 and declare an emergency.
Just one question.
That's what we do when we do a single reading, and it's required by state law. Mr. Gutierrez?
I guess we made it perfectly clear that this applies only to residents that refuse the new meter.
So again, what I would say is that if you pass this, if we had a resident who shows up and says, and asks for it, we will now do that. I will tell you that if we're mistaken about the $50 fee, because I don't think we're going to have more than a handful,
right.
We're going to come back and go, just what Councilman Larson going, I've got this many, bump it up to 100.
My question is, how is the account going to be flagged so when that resident sells his house that the new homeowner is not levied that fee?
So the new homeowner with meter has to get turned over. So when you sell, you cancel it, the new person comes in. At that point, we're going to go, oh, guess what? Potentially, you're the one person with a manual meter. We can save you some money. Let us put in a radio meter, and they can make the call.
It's dumb.
Thank you.
Mr. Davis, do you have anything further?
Yeah, I mean, it's not often that I agree with Councilman Larson, but every now and then there's that rare moment. This happens to be one of them. We talked about the new meters, and the whole purpose of this was because we've got old failing meters and people were getting bad readings, and we go to a system that is more cost efficient, less labor intensive, and now we want to step backwards. I agree. When you explain, anyway, I don't see why we would even entertain a manual meter. And if we're going to step backwards and we're going to endure this extra tracking of who's got what kind of meter and then have to physically go out there and take manual readings, I honestly don't think it ought to be convenient in any way, shape, or form. I'm looking at the fee schedule right now, and, even things like our alarm service fees. If you have a false alarm, we give you the first freebie, the second freebie, the third freebie, and then for 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, it starts going 100, 150, 200, 250. The reason for that is to get people to understand, if you got a false alarm on your alarm system, get it fixed so that we're not tying up city resources. We're not tying up police officers driving around because you've got a bad alarm system. I don't understand the logic of going backwards. If we're going to do it to appease somebody, that one or two or three people that want it, okay. I don't think it ought to be. It's not convenient for the city. I don't think it should be convenient for them.
I think if council does not approve it, then I think we just go back to them and we have to tell them. And council said, you either got to have it, or if you refuse to do it, then you're either going to have to move out of your house, or
certainly happy to deliver the message we're not doing it.
And then if they refuse, then we'd have to bring it back to council maybe for further action.
Council, anybody else?
I don't want to see the legal fees for that, so.
Got a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Other comments, questions from council? Now, 6 of you missed your opportunity to have a 3-3 vote and force me to make the decision. You had the opportunity,
We haven't voted yet.
and you let it go. I have a motion from the chair and a second. I'm going to call for a vote.
Aye. Nay.
Aye.
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 I believe I have 6 ayes and 1 nay, and the motion carries. First and final reading. It may be absurd, but we spent much less time discussing this item than we spent years ago on the color and the type font of the word Schertz on our water towers. We spent nearly an hour and a half on that one, so I think this was perhaps judicious. Item number 12, Ordinance 19T13, an ordinance by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing an adjustment to the fiscal year 2018-19 budget, repealing all ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict with this ordinance and providing an effective date and declaring an emergency. First and final reading.
That's right, Mayor. So this item is related to the next item, and essentially, unfortunately, we're having to be here because we've hit some things with the fire station construction project that we need to come back and ask for more money for. The first item is the budget adjustment to pull the money from the reserved fund. Again, we just had the CAFR. The money is there. I'm not diminishing the fact that we're here asking for this with that. But so the first item is to allocate the money from the reserve for the project going forward, just under $300,000.
All right, questions, Mr. Edwards?
288,000, right?
Yes, sir. 288,236.
Mayor, I just want to make a motion that we approve ordinance number 19T13.
Second.
I have a motion from Dr. Scagliola, a second from Mr. Edwards. Any other comments, questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. The next item is item number 13, Resolution 19R40, a resolution of the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing an amendment to the existing GMP agreement with the construction manager at risk agreement for the construction phase services to Fire Station number 3 and other matters in connection therewith. Mr. James?
Mayor, this item's related to the next one, obviously. The reason we do it is we've hit a few things on the fire station construction project. It's not with the building itself, it's with the infrastructure to serve it, as the report lays out, and I think the initial report you got left off part of it. But essentially, we've hit some of those costs to serve the property that are greater than was anticipated for a variety of reasons. We've got a cost for water line at about $100,000. We've got additional sewer piping coming in at $46,000. There's high-end estimate that we're going to try to keep working down with some different designs at $200,000 for drainage. And then because of the delays associated with the water and the sewer, it's a $65,000 delay cost. Part of the reason we're asking for the full drainage money now is so we don't hit a delay going forward, but the drainage has to be in at the end of the project, so we're going to keep working it down. But as frustrating as it is, I think the biggest frustration, obviously, is the delay cost, and you go, it's just wasted money, and it is. And I can go into more detail as to what we've got, but again, I would say that some of this stuff we've hit, not all of it, it's a bit like what we found on some of our road construction. We knew where the sewer manhole was. It's a 4-inch line. Yep, we can tap that. Only then to find out the flows generated aren't enough for the fire station. It doesn't get there, and in fact, that line is angled the opposite way.
Mr. Edwards?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve resolution number 19R40.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Edwards. I have a second from Mr. Davis. Mr. Larson?
I just have a few questions. So I guess one of the questions I have, help me understand what, were any of these things that we could have anticipated? Why couldn't we have anticipated these when it's our own infrastructure?
So, Councilman, I will tell you this, and I think there may be a little different. Yeah, we could have, should have anticipated all of them.
So there's lessons learned.
I think there's a lesson learned. Now, I will say this, and I want to be very clear. That's not to say that staff was indifferent to these things. Again, one of the things that we sit here and lament, we can see the manhole, the sewer manhole. We can tap into it. At this point, we're going, why is it going the angle it does? It makes no sense. So again, lesson learned is, yeah, we need to fully, much like the road stuff, but that is not to criticize staff on that one, to say that's something that you would normally check. You normally look and go, yeah, I got a sewer, nobody's using it, there's plenty of capacity, as opposed to it's angled the wrong way, and even if I could adjust that, I don't have enough flow to keep it moving from this one project. I think some of the stuff with the drainage was what was the anticipation of development timing occurring on the property around us, what was going to be going on with TxDOT in terms of improvements they're making to be able to convey the flow all the way to don't create a problem for there. So I think certainly we could have done a better job. I will tell you, though, it wasn't that staff was lax or indifferent. I think it's kind of what I would say John Nowak would tell you now. He doesn't assume anything is there with the road because of what he's sort of seen. And so we need to do better in the future, but that's not to say that we were lax or indifferent.
I would also say that we probably could have done a better job of anticipating it, but we would have had to do this anyway. I mean, we were probably going to have these costs anyway, whether we did them earlier or now. And, you know, staff has worked really hard to try to get the costs identified.
And help me understand the delay fee. Obviously, it's part of our contract, but so we identify an issue. What keeps us from moving forward to avoid delay fees? And are we anticipating, like, how do we avoid additional delay fees?
Okay, so how we avoid additional delay fees is getting you to approve all of this money now, including the potential $200,000 for drainage. And we're going to try to work that down, but what delays us is if I don't have money, and then I've got to stop things. Part of the delay comes in is what is the appropriate solution in trying to do a cost-effective manner. And you probably don't care, and this is more than you wanted his answer, and again, Phil will cringe because I get this wrong. So one of the questions is, hey, I've got to extend this line across Lower Seguin Road. Well, do I want to open cut it, right? Or do I want to bore it? Well, if I bore it, how deep am I? 7 feet? And then I've got to build the big areas at the end to put the equipment down, and I've got to have the air thing coming up. And so even today, when we're going over it, we went back over this issue of walk us through one more time why open cutting isn't worse. Well, then you've got to do flowable fill under the line. Then I've got to manage traffic, and we've got all this traffic from Randolph using it. Road's going to be shut down for 2 weeks, and I've got to do a lane at a time, this and this and this and this. And so the reason for the delay on some of this was even figuring out, now that we know we've got a problem, what's the appropriate solution. So even the solution now with the sewer, I'm meeting with the Crossvine folks tomorrow going, hey, I need approval to do this on your property. And we've had this conversation because there are these series of things. And so part of it is figuring out what's the appropriate decision. That's partly based on cost, but that's partly, frankly, based on being able to control our destiny to go, I can make this thing happen. So we open now, or they're finished when they think early September. Rain delay, mid to late September now. As opposed to I've got a hang up and I can't get there, so I've got to control my own destiny. So the delay on this was figuring out the solution, because when we realized, hey, that sewer line angles the wrong way and it doesn't have enough flow, they've got to go back and say, well, where can I tap into now? You've got to resurvey, you've got to recheck, we've got to re-verify everything going the right way because we're hesitant now. The engineer has to redesign, we've got to adjust that. It takes frustratingly long time, which is part of the reason you want to pin this stuff down on the front end and not be dealing with this mid-project.
And then I guess, and this, just please jog my memory, is this the first time we've come to council for additional money on this project?
This is the first time we've come to you for additional money. Now, a couple things I will say, and this, if you're happy or not happy, we build in, and Phil can correct me on this, we build in two kinds of contingency, because we have a guaranteed maximum, but we build in a couple contingencies. One is the contingency we control so that when they come back in and say, hey, when we look at it and go, you know, in hindsight, now that we're looking at this, we want another fire hydrant on the back corner of the property to be doing training and things like that. They go, well, we can do that for you. You just didn't have it in the plans. Okay, what does it cost to add? So I use our contingency, and that was one thing we did, and the cost of that was, yeah, and that's the water cost. The other is the contractor has a contingency, but they sort of control that. So it becomes this issue of where they can use it. So I've got some contingency. These are outside of that, and I need to move it forward. Now, what I will say is we've built in another $50,000. Rather than come to you and try to lowball it and go, just give me $233, then I've got no money to deal with anything, and it's just started going vertical, so I've built in 50. So if something else pops up over the course of the project that's 20,000 and 10,000, or that's the contractor controlled, we can still deal with that. And so that's why we normally build in, here's the price of the contract, and we do this on our public works ones, that we're going to pay them, but we've got budget and additional contingency for stuff that arises. And sometimes it comes up above and beyond that. So that's, yeah, this is the first time we come, and this is the last time we're coming.
And then just because I want to understand for a future conversation, if this had been a private development, would the kind of costs that we're looking at are costs that they would have to cover as well? Like, I guess I'm trying to understand, would their experience be the same, and that they would talk to the city and the city say, oh, there's a manhole right there, you can tap into there, and then they get started, and then you'd be like, well, psych, just kidding. Is that, I'm trying to understand the experience a developer would have. Would it be the same?
The developer would have the exact same thing. So again, if the developer went out in this thing that they were planning to do, and you had a change condition, then they would have to bear that cost. Now, here's sometimes what it is, which is developers get into a project, they haven't pinned stuff down, they haven't gotten the approvals, and then we kind of say, hey, this is what you've got, and this is where you deal with it. The Fresenius Medical, they dealt with some significant costs on Fresenius. What was it? Was it sewer or drainage? Sewer costs. So we had a developer, they have these as well. They never quite pin them down. They don't get approval on their civils, or we do a preliminary with the site plan. So when the site plan comes in, we get a preliminary grading, preliminary utility plan, and it's just that. It's not the final. It's just, how do we think this is going to work? It saves the applicant the cost of doing full-blown drawings at the front end, gives us a feel for it. But yeah, to be honest, sometimes when they do those full-blown drawings, something gets discovered, which is why you do it, and go, this changes what can happen or what doesn't happen.
And so I guess the follow-up to that is that just a byproduct of any development, or are there tools cities can use that they would know, hey, this is how much flow we have, this is the angle that it's at, that developers have access to?
So this, I will say, this is a problem that cities struggle with older infrastructure. Now, I will say this, when we talk older infrastructure, it's not necessarily 10 years old. It's older than that, but you can have it happen. And so one of the things is, part of the reason we have gone to some of the steps we've made with where we've updated our Public Works Manual and our Public Works Specification Manual, where we've gone to digitizing things, where, on city projects, Bill in GIS goes out with the Trimble and he maps out all our lines. It's to avoid stuff like that. So where you don't have the technology, it happens. So yeah, it's out there. What we try to be cognizant of, you need to go check, you need to go check, you need to go check. But occasionally it still pops up.
Thank you.
I will say that in the realm of professional project management, there's three things you can do with risk. You can avoid risk, you can accept risk, you can mitigate risk. If you seek to avoid and mitigate all risks, you will have no budget to begin your project. And so it's a delicate balancing act, whether it's in a construction project, whether it's software development, whatever the case may be. There are some risks that you can avoid, some that you can mitigate, some that you simply accept and say, if it happens, it happens, and we're going to run with that. And finding the equilibrium point for all those considerations is the art, and it's never perfect. That said, I have a motion and a second. I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays. The motion carries. We need to go back now to workshops. We have a few things to work on here yet. Next workshop is I'm going to skip to the fourth one, maybe come back to the third one. We're going to go to the workshop, discussion possible action regarding Unified Development Code, or UDC updates. So know who's going to lead us off on that one. We have the team.
Good evening. So Lisa and I are here today to talk about the UDC and some of the recent challenges and concerns and struggles that we've been having with it, along with the applicants and developers that we work with on a daily basis. So the first slide is some of the most frequent concerns that we have with the UDC. So the first one being Article 9, Site Design Standards. The big ones out of there, the Exterior Construction and Design Standards, that's where those masonry and glazing requirements come in for buildings. Landscaping, screening and fencing, which is where the masonry wall adjacent to residential comes in, tree preservation and mitigation, and then some of the other frequent concerns, but not as frequent as the Article 9. Article 14, the additional design requirements, that again deals with landscaping, outdoor display and storage, and then non-conforming uses, lots and structures, Article 7. Some of the other UDC sections that staff internally has discussed reviewing based on some comments from applicants are listed here. Many of them, we feel need to be reviewed based on just internal conversations that we've had. So I wanted to go through three of the biggest comments and concerns that we get from applicants. So the first one is on section 2195. Once again, that's that masonry requirement. So the majority of the time we are told, that the required amount of masonry and glazing and specific building materials listed as masonry doesn't really allow for unique or different development. So just some brief history. Prior to 2009, there were no general masonry requirements. In 2009, City Council adopted pretty strict requirements requiring at least 100% of the front facade being masonry. And then we came back in 2015 and reduced that and made more categories based on what type of business it would be. The next one is something that we hear very frequently is in relation to the landscaping and then screening and fencing. So with the landscaping, a lot of the times we require so much landscaping that it reduces the amount of buildable area on the lot. Another big one is that masonry wall adjacent to non-residential adjacent to residential, having to construct an 8-foot masonry wall and then a 20-foot landscape buffer inside that masonry wall. So just a brief history on that. Even back into the 1996 UDC, that masonry wall was required. Back in 2009 when that UDC amendment was adopted, same thing, 8-foot masonry wall was still in place, but then the additional 20-foot landscape buffer, our current requirement, was put in place. Last one I'll go through is that additional design requirement out of Article 14, Transportation. So it specifically applies to principal and secondary arterials. So it requires a 20-foot landscape buffer with one shade tree every 20 feet along the frontage. So that's along Schertz Parkway, 309, 78, properties that they're already having to provide right-of-way dedication most likely, and then easements to move utilities outside of TxDOT right-of-way potentially. And then on top of that, they have a 20-foot landscape buffer with many trees most of the time. So we have quite a few comments on that as well, typically.
Just wanted to add a few things as well. As Emily had mentioned that in 2009 the Unified Development Code was changed. The 1996 version was in place for a very long time, and in 2009 there was a very big change. And with that came a lot of the community desires. They wanted to see, not these corrugated metal buildings. They wanted to see upgraded materials on buildings, and so the code was changed. As Mr. Roberts mentioned earlier, with that change in the 2009 code, it allows very little flexibility for staff to make decisions. It's a shall. There are a lot of shalls in there. It's not a lot of mays. It's a lot of shalls, and so staff the code is there in place, and that is what we actually enforce when it comes down to requirements. And so the flexibility isn't there. We agree that we would like to see more flexibility in the code, and we do our very best to do interpretations where we can to try to mitigate some of the negative. Some of the things that we looked at when we went through these things, and we've been going through them for years now, making spreadsheets, just determining the things that we want to change. And you can see over the years we have brought forward some Unified Development Code changes over the last 10 years. But the question we would ask is, have the community desires changed from what they were 10 years ago in 2009 to what they are today? And are those things that we're needing to address? The challenges that we're having is the flexibility in the code. And then the other challenges is we know that folks are going to be unhappy whether we change the code or not change the code. There are going to be people who actually really like the way it is, and there are people who don't. And then just balancing those time frames with our resources that we have now, the current planning projects, the customers that need assistance, and then working these code changes into our daily routines to bring them in front of y'all. And then we're open for questions, comments.
Council? Anyone? Council?
So you guys going to come back to us and give us an opportunity to look at the changes that you want to implement? Or I would like to see, I would like to see, perhaps we get a couple of business owners and have them come in and give some more input, because the business owners are the ones that are actually going out and buying the commercial property, doing the development. I received a letter from a couple of parishioners over at, I think it's Good Shepherd, and they have concerns as well about the wall. I saw that Mr. Roberts came in asking the same question. And also the building materials, they've changed over the years too. So some things are sprung buildings and so forth. Those things are getting better, the technique. So you guys are coming back to us with some kind of formative plan, right?
We certainly can. We were looking for input from council to find out where your, to start with where you feel like we need to pay the most attention to, and then Brian's coming up, so we will let him offer his thoughts on this as well.
Well, let me offer this, Councilman Edwards. I think staff did a good job kind of outlining the problem. It's interesting. There are things that we have people who develop are frustrated with. There are things that staff sits around in the office and laments and curses and goes, I don't know why we have this thing. I'm the one that has to be there. Bad news. The flip side is there are things we get residents frustrated that we don't do. So, for example, while that 8-foot masonry wall and the 20-foot landscape buffer, when we say, well, it's just a little medical office building like the one across from Pascal, that seems kind of excessive. Imagine some of you who are here when we had the apartment complexes coming through, and I've got a 3-story apartment complex and all that height and all that effort. Those residents are probably going, that's not enough. And so that's really where the challenge is. The other thing I'd maybe add to what Lisa says is, you know, it's about whether the community's expectations have changed, but it's also about whether or not the current code is even getting us what we want. Or are we saying, you know, we've got this provision. So we have a provision that screens parking areas between industrial uses right now. So you got 2 big industrial users, big warehouse buildings. They've got kind of parking lined up side by side that runs in the property line in between. They've got to do screening of shrubs, not a wall, down both of their sides because we want to screen that parking. And yet staff would sit there and they probably back in their office going, it's an industrial building with a bunch of trucks and just this, that, and the other. It doesn't sort of necessarily make sense. But at the same time, I think if we look at our industrial areas, the new ones going in, the Titan areas, we go, that's what we want. We want a higher sort of quality. And so I think for me it really is about, let's look at our codes and say, what is it we're trying to achieve? So landscaping. We've all seen the communities where it's just bare concrete out front going, that looks horrible. Well, we don't want that. We've also heard from some folks, they're planting big trees under power lines. Well, that doesn't make sense. They're going to grow up. But again, am I going to make you now do a 40-foot buffer to move the trees back? You've over-landscaped it. And we've seen those where, look nice first day it went in, and they're all driving by going, I don't know where it is. I can't see it. I got this wall of shrubs that doesn't make sense. And so I think really what we would suggest is let's go through a thoughtful effort. Let's use the Planning and Zoning Commission. Much like we've done with other, let's invite the folks in, a wide variety. So the small business owner, the folks from Titan, for example, that we bring in, include some residents. We've got that on P&Z, and really kind of talk about it. And we don't need to take forever, but we need to be thoughtful about it so that at the end of the day, when you say, well, do you have a feel for what people think about it? We can tell you yes. We would suggest starting with the site design standard because that's what we're hearing about mostly. So the landscaping, the screening. Let's make sure we think it through. We want to have a system, I think, that isn't so rigid that it doesn't give people any kind of option to deal with something. But at the same time, the last thing you want is staff sitting there often saying, what should I make them do? Doesn't work for anybody. That doesn't work for staff because they're going to be sitting there going, because if residents don't like this and they start squawking, it's my head on the deal. Well, we can build in that flexibility. So that would be what we would suggest is use P&Z with public meetings, invite the folks who are interested, a good cross-section, to talk about it, move through sort of section by section to get where we want to be.
Let's just leave it better than we found it.
A little better than we found it. I don't think it's that complicated. I think what staff will tell you when they try to be very nice about it is they don't have time trying to manage the development to make it through. And that's one of the struggles, because you've run some code changes and now we stalled just because of how busy we are. You may recall, those of you who were here when we did this before in 2009, it was, I believe, $170,000 that we spent on a consultant. We don't think we need to bring in a consultant. We have professional staff. We think they interact with the community a lot. The community tells them a lot what they think about it, and will continue to. But part of what I'm going to be blunt about that I think the city manager and I are going to do is, if the direction tonight is, yeah, let's move forward with those annexations that are going to come online, we still need to make sure the implementation of the software is good. We don't want to spend $190,000 on an outside consultant. And then frankly, if the next item, which is, yeah, hey, our comp plan that we fully did a number of years ago, that when we did the sector plan, we spent $700,000, Lisa? Can you correct me on that? 700 plus thousand. We think we can do better job in-house. We're going to need to look at adding resources, but we think we can do it for far less and get greater benefit. But add it so that we make progress. We're not stalled out on it. We're not going to, but we're just going to need to add some resources. So I think staff can do it. I think they can lead an effort that at the end of the day, everybody may not like everything, but hopefully you get people standing up saying, I was heard on the process, and my input helped shape this aspect of it. This aspect they didn't as much, but.
My observation is that the staff is, the planning staff particularly, is overtasked, and these are major efforts, and we'll save money if we don't use consultants. We've got professional people here, but I think we need to seriously consider in the budget exercise to adding some staff in the planning department.
Okay, Mr. Brown?
What is the status on the planning software?
So currently, we are still in the data collection phase. We are identifying all of our processes. We're coming down on the end of the process in December. You probably saw the report, but on December, we dedicated one staff member to work focused solely on that. And Bryce could probably add to that. It's been a real task. He's had to do a lot of deep dives into not just the planning processes, but the engineering processes. I mean, it's all the departments in fire, public works,
right.
Working with the marshal's department on code enforcement. So it's been a deep dive, and so we are nearing the end of data collection. Once we're finished with that, then it'll go into a stage where they do the configuration, which will take at least 2 or 3 months on the software company's side of it. They'll come back and do validation with us. They'll come in and we'll try to break the system and find out where our errors are, and then we'll be ready for implementation. We're hoping to have implementation. The plan is for 2019, so later this year.
Okay, good.
That's the plan.
Yeah. I realize that.
Oh, yeah. And so during that, we have been making quite a few changes in the department to try to ease people into the transition of this new software where we're going all digital. So currently, December of not 2018, but 2017, we went to digital, where people request through a portal their inspections. This past year, 2018, in the beginning of this year, we started doing that with all of our applications. So we've created this portal on the city website that allows people to submit all of their applications online, where they never have to walk into the office. Last year, we also worked with finance to allow people to escrow funds to be able to pay for their permits through us. Basically, they send us an email. It has to be a person's named on the list. We're able to take the information from the information they provide us, run it through. They don't have to walk in the door. We email them their permits. We actually now started at the beginning of this year digital plan review, because as part of the new software, we actually started with a new program called Bluebeam. So now all of planning and all of inspections are doing all plan reviews digitally, as well as we've just rolled it out to engineering and fire. So all plan reviews digital, as well as then the approved plans are digital. We share that on we have the SharePoint 365, so we use our existing resources that we have, and we share that with our builders, our engineers, so that they can actually pull the information. It's been a step-by-step process, and it's not like 100% there, because that's what the software will do for us, but it's definitely helped our customers be able to conduct business with us in a different fashion, more, where they don't have to spend so much time on the road coming in.
Right.
We're able to take care of them through the digital format.
So we have a plan for the process right now, and it's moving forward.
Yes.
What we need now is to adjust the rules that you work under.
Yes.
Yeah. And I agree that some type of a small working group with real business owners, because it seems to me that there's a lot of people out there that are very willing to spend other people's money for something that they want to see. But when it comes down to opening their checkbook, when it comes time to add 20 feet of landscaping, add 200 trees, things like that, then it becomes, oh, well, I didn't really want to do that.
Yeah, and in the past, in 2015, Bryce did a really good job on providing a visual survey for folks. So we got together some stakeholder groups, engineers. We worked with the chamber to get some business owners, architects, the community stakeholders, as well as like boards and commissions, and invited them. And we provided a visual survey for them, and we created a stakeholder group that we set goals, and so we're familiar with that type of process. So
Very good. I look forward to seeing something, because I know I've talked with people that say, oh, I'd like Schertz to look more like Scottsdale. Well, we're not Scottsdale.
Yeah.
Just one more thing that planning has been working on with Gail and Brenda is the agenda software. So I'm sure you've seen it in the packet as like the informational updates. So planning ourselves have done the last two P&Z agendas completely in Agenda Quick in the agenda software. We've scheduled the on-site training for all the rest of the users. City Council stuff is basically ready to go too. It's just working out the last couple of kinks. So there's a lot of other changes that we're doing as well that are going to help improve the process for us and also the residents. It'll make the agenda a lot more user-friendly.
Well, this group right here is, this is it. This is the group that's going to do the UDC, the comp plan, City View, the new agenda software, in addition to their normal jobs with the P&Z, and somehow have time to eat, sleep, do their laundry, and other things that they need to do. So they are, they're super troopers.
Dr. Scagliola.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been to planning development department. I've seen it from the inside out, from the outside in, and y'all do a Herculean effort. You really do, using the resources that you have available. I highly encourage sitting down with the stakeholders and the shareholders in the process. Mr. James, I think you have a legitimate strategy moving forward. Where are you going to find the time to do it? I don't know. You need additional assistance? Ask for it. I agree we probably don't need to bring outsiders in, but if we could bring additional assistance to us, that definitely is something worth asking for. So what I suggest, though, is when you sit down, people have their likes and their dislikes. What I recommend is you focus on the objective. What is it that you want to accomplish? And then how do you go about getting it? I mean, for example, stucco versus rock work. There have been a lot of changes in materials, and it's really amazing what you can turn stucco into. By the way, Scagliola itself is an artistic form. It turns plaster into something that looks like marble. And if you go up to Austin, they actually have it on the walls. So I know of what I speak. Yeah, no. Come on. Now you're just dissing me. Anyway, I think you got a good plan. Go for it.
Mr. Larson?
I just want to, I'll try to be brief. I like the idea of working group with stakeholders, especially business owners and people in the community. But I will say, I think there's a staffing shortage, obviously, and I got some ideas where we can get some funds to maybe help some staffing. But beyond that, I think there's some low-hanging fruit that we already have identified that I don't want to wait for this 400-year government process to get. Let's get the low-hanging fruit to us, in front of us, things like getting rid of tree mitigation, and the ones that y'all have identified, because I know y'all have identified some that can give you the flexibility as quickly as possible that you've already got in your Excel spreadsheet. Let's get those through the process and then get the working group to tackle the bigger task. That's my hope, wish, suggestion. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'd like to see some of these changes that give the staff more flexibility and developers, small business owners, the opportunities, not in years, but in weeks and months.
Let me say, we will work with all haste. There are some that are pretty straightforward. We can run the change to the code that says, now we have a provision that prohibits you from putting in a freestanding kiosk if the business does not have a permanent spot around the edge. So you go, well, how come there's not just a little bank ATM drive-through in the shopping center? Well, because we have a code that prohibits it under certain circumstances. Those are ones that we can do. I will say this, that what seems easy, that's a challenge, is the flexibility. Because what we want is flexibility. What we want to avoid is what, Dan? Being arbitrary and capricious. And so that's the hard part. And so part of what we don't want to do is try stuff, create different codes that people fall under. So yeah, we can make some quickie things like that to show some progress and start the conversations. But I think some of these, we need to be thoughtful doing it to get a right answer, because that's the challenge.
Mr. Davis?
So what are we looking at time? You mentioned about getting with planning and zoning and getting some folks in there, the public. I certainly want to hear from small business owners and developers, but I don't want to hear just from them, because they have a perspective that is based on their bottom line and based on their business. And I definitely want some citizen input, but then again, on the same token, citizens have their goggles on. I thought it was interesting in the presentation that, our UDC, we had a vision back in 96 on one of the lines, and we made another change in 2009. It's 10 years later. I think you've heard enough of it from the council that building designs have changed over the years. Building materials have changed over the years. I think it's a great idea to have some flexibility. Case in point, as I was reading this earlier, you look at our animal shelter. I remember sitting out there when we were building the animal shelter, and based on the budget, our original plan, if I recall correctly, was we were going to do stone on just the front. And I remember sitting out there and hearing council say, well, but our design standard says we have stone around the entire building, so we had to do a price mod. Council back in the day did a price mod, so we turned around and do stone all the way around the perimeter. And the reality of it is we're more worried about stone on the side of the building and stone on the back of an animal shelter. And somehow or another we managed to fumble the air handling system and the drainage for the building. Don't get me wrong, the brake check up on the frontage road is the most beautiful brake check I've ever seen in the world, with the stone all the way around the building. But I just don't think that requirement is something that's going to kill the city of Schertz. If we sort of ease up a little bit and say, hey, have a stone on the front and stucco's fine on the side and the back, I like the idea of going to planning and zoning. I don't want to see this drawn out. I wouldn't want to see this drawn out where we have a public meeting and we're drawing in business owners and we have a hard time getting them out anyway. So I wouldn't want to see a meeting where we're talking about screening and then have to do another planning and zoning session where we're talking about facades, and then another one where we're talking about tree mitigation. I would think a lot of these site design ones, I would prefer to like fast track this and get a business input and a public input and see if we can bring it up to a reality. I mentioned earlier to the staff, you know, I look at having guardrails. I want to live in a community that looks good, but it shouldn't have to be this painful to build a building or to put in a retail establishment or to plant trees. I think we need to have a little bit more common sense on this.
I think fair point. And again, I will say this. I think that, you know, part of what we're going to do is it's some of those things, but it's also how we approach it. So I think what we're not planning to do, because of what we've heard council saying in terms of let's move this along, is start that meeting and say, it's a blank slate. Let's talk about our feelings and let's talk about it. If you want to move more quickly, it's staff working, having an understanding of where we're headed and saying, here's a draft of what we could go to. Here are 3 or 4 decision points relative to that with what our potential options are. Let's get people react to that. And I think if we do it that way, it's more consistent with what you're saying, which is it keeps us in the rails, as you're going over it, and it keeps us from going on and on with meeting after meeting after meeting. So I think we've heard what you've said, which is let's be very thoughtful how we move and not. Thanks. Yes, sir.
Dr. Brown, you had something you wanted to add?
No, I mean, I think flexibility for staff is good, but it only works when, you know, it's doable. So if we have flexibility and then we have a long line of folks who come in and say, well, why did staff make that decision? That's terrible. That looks terrible. What we need here are more standards. That's our problem. So when you give us flexibility, make sure that it's, you know, we can live with the outcome.
It is a delicate balance. It always has been. All right, you have what you need from the council. Very fine. All right, let's go to our last workshop item that we have, and that's regarding the comprehensive land plan. Cox double points on the beard.
Well,
although the points don't matter.
To Councilman Brown's point earlier, this is my City View victory beard, and I don't want it to become a Viking victory beard, so we're trying to get through it as quickly as we can. Okay, this evening, I just want to go over, and I'll try to be brief. I know we're getting into the later hours of the meeting. But I just want to go over, similar to what Emily and Lisa covered on UDC and some common criticisms that we receive and comments that we receive, a little bit of the issues that we run into as staff kind of regularly with our comprehensive plan. So to begin with, the comprehensive plan is not actually just one document. It's actually a series of documents, each with its kind of own purpose. In planning, we colloquially use the term comp plan to represent the land use portion of this, but keep in mind that there is the parks plan that I believe Councilman Davis worked on extensively many years ago, as well as the master thoroughfare plan, and then we have a future land use map, which is kind of a conglomeration of all of these plans kind of put together in a graphical format. So to begin with, I want to talk about southern Schertz. This area was picked up in the 2013 sector plan, and the first area I want to talk about is localized here at the intersection of 1518 and Lower Seguin Road. What you'll see this area is identified as is mixed-use core. It's really designed as a southern Schertz town center. It'll have a walkable, high-intensity mixed use that will have a lot of commercial to support the surrounding neighborhoods, which you'll see is the kind of purple here is a mixed-use neighborhood, as well as the estate neighborhood items through this kind of orange color as you go further down. The comprehensive plan also identifies a lot of information about recommended design standards and how to develop, and bringing large sections in at one time to kind of set the stage. So I encourage all of you, if you haven't, kind of look through that section of the comprehensive plan. I think the Southern Schertz land use is about 8 or 9 pages long, not too bad out of the total of 120-something pages, and the same for Northern Schertz. The next section is here in this light green. It's the agricultural residential. I believe we had some landowners several meetings back that were representative of a lot of the properties kind of in this area here and this area here. This is designed to maintain Schertz's rural feel in Southern Schertz, and that was a request of the landowners at the time, is my understanding as well, as this comprehensive plan was put together. The kind of heartburn that everybody has now is that, as Mr. James mentioned earlier, it is recommended at a 5-acre minimum lot size. There is some ability to do some clustering of developments, but you're still talking about humongous areas of land to be preserved. It also allows for a little bit of kind of ag-related businesses, outdoor veterinary clinics, things like that it also recommends along the rural frontage roads, so those areas that are kind of in the green here. The next area as well that I want to talk about is kind of everything south of Randolph that's in those fun APZ zones, which is the accident potential zones, and a little bit about the air installation compatible use zone study that was most recently approved in 2017 for Randolph Air Force Base. And so what we're looking at here is specifically here in the middle, you'll see that agricultural conservation again at 1 per 5 acres. The Randolph report actually comes back with a higher number. And then we have the light or the dark blue here, which is the air installation compatible use zone. This is not actually referenced as a land use in the sector plan update. So we use the 2002 portion, which basically kind of says, hey, follow the air installation compatible use zone. So generally very low density developments, not large clusters of people, because in the event of a crash, we want to minimize both lost property and potential loss of life. The orange here is identified as a state and neighborhood. This most directly translates to our residential agriculture, or sorry, our RA zoning district, yes, residential agriculture, which is 1/2 acre minimum lot size. It also has an allowance for a recommendation of clustering development. We actually had the Howley's Cove subdivision, which is over here just off of 1518, utilize that in a planned development district where they have a significant amount of land that is being reserved and they're actually dedicating as parkland to maintain a roughly 2 dwelling units per acre ratio across the land. And so this is a bit of a conflict with the air installation compatible use zone study because it does call for densities greater than 1/2 acre in this area. A lot of that also is because of how they saw Laura Heights and Reserve at Schertz and that kind of subdivision down there develop, which if you've been through that area, it is still kind of residential subdivision, just bigger. And that's not kind of what everybody was expecting when they originally said that, oh yeah, 1/2 acre sounds good, because I think most people were thinking, oh, it'll be the ranchette here that may be a little smaller than this big 15, 20 acre property over here and kind of develop in that pattern. That's not what we've seen. So in Southern Schertz, we've also seen a lot of change. With the CCMA wastewater treatment plant coming in online down south, that opens up a lot of opportunity for this entire area to receive sewer in a gravity feed manner, which is a much cheaper way of doing it. And so we just had a number of changes. In Northern Schertz, no, my map, I'll go slow. Come on, there we go. So in Northern Schertz, I just want to mention kind of 2 areas real quick. The first area is localized here in the dark purple, which is going to be the Northern Town Center. It's also identified as a TOD network, which is a transit-oriented development. This was the location that was planned for the Lone Star Rail rail stop. That project has since tanked for now, so there is definitely a change in condition up there. The zoning that is over in that section is M1, which is light manufacturing. So there is always the possibility due to that incompatibility of zoning versus the comprehensive plan, that if the industrial comes in first and encroaches too far, it may force a change in the plan anyways. The other area is this area along 482. This is the 2252 split. We've had a little bit of commercial, more industrial, I guess I'll call it rural industrial development. There's a greenhouse location, a commercial greenhouse location that's opening up there. Some trade shops that are opening up there with outdoor storage. No overly manufacturing items or heavy polluters or anything like that. But that does jeopardize this ability for the agricultural conservation, again, maintain that rural character in northern Schertz. And I'll kind of show you this real quick just so you can understand that as well. This green area is roughly this section here as well, and you'll see the gray is representative of the M1, which is that light manufacturing. And then on the TOD area as well, kind of same thing where I've got that light manufacturing. So what does that mean? As planning has looked over this, it's probably due for a hard review and maybe even an update, especially with the citizens coming in requesting that. Since I've been here for about 5.5 years, we have run a few updates intermittently that we've been able to do kind of in between current planning projects as we clean things up. We ran a plan development for Cover's Cove to pick up some lots that we couldn't rezone to R6 that were zoned in general business but were platted as residential lots, as well as picking up the kind of change in condition, I believe, last year, just the year before, along Old Wiederstein Road that was previously identified as research and development and light industrial, but actually contains the Riata and Belmont subdivisions as well as the school site. So we kind of cleaned that up so we wouldn't have to have issues with industrial development going in a section that's not really for industrial development. But the 2002, which is most of Central Schertz, there are even items in that need to be updated. So if you look through that section, you may find that there are zoning incompatibilities and there's some land use items that are probably worth talking about, especially for infill subdivision, which is a development item, doesn't get a lot of attention here, but we do deal with those pressures, and they do come with very unique challenges for existing development, existing infill sites that aren't developed yet. So staff, we are supportive of a comprehensive plan update and initiating that process, as Mr. James alluded to earlier, as well as Dr. Brown. It does come with resources. So we think that this is something that could be done in-house. There's definitely more resource that would be needed to do that. Oftentimes we get a more tailored to Schertz product out of that because the folks working on it obviously are very involved in the community and have a vested interest in making that succeed. So with that, I'll field any questions that you have.
Council. Dr. Scagliola.
Yeah, I noticed on the along the I-10 corridor, I just wonder if we're giving away too much opportunity down there, not having general business or something like that along the entire corridor. I don't know if anybody really looked at it with a microscope with that in mind, but it makes sense to me. And then switching from the south side of town to the north side of town, you know my feelings about the golf course and what it should be zoned as. So I can't tell you to give that some consideration, but I certainly will be. And the same thing applies, though. How do you maintain the general business along I-35? We get a lot of requests to rezone it. But what do you lose if you do rezone it? Where do your opportunities go? And I like Councilmember Edwards' suggestion about increased areas for entertainment venues and things like that. So the railroad, I guess that went away completely. That doesn't mean we can't reimagine using the areas or something up there to accommodate our future needs. That's all I have, sir.
I think I'm hearing from council on both the UDC and with regard to the comprehensive land plan. And back in the booth, don't get nervous. This is a project management phrase, not an IT phrase. That the council may be willing to spend some money to crash the network. Council probably is not wanting, in my mind, to hire a lot of permanent employees. But if it makes sense for us to have some contract employees for a discrete period of time so that our seasoned staff can spend the time we need to on accelerating the pace at which we address the Unified Development Code and the Comprehensive Land Plan, I think that would be met favorably from council, and I certainly would be supportive of that kind of expenditure. But we need you to tell us what you need, and we need to understand what we'll get for the money we're going to spend. I do think it's critical, and that we are at an interesting juncture that we address these things. And as council said earlier with regard to the UDC, that we find those things that it is a delicate balance, but those things that we can change in the very short term that have much impact. So come back to us and tell us what's possible. Come back to us and tell us what you need. I really do hear a sentiment that the council's willing to pony up funds for a discrete period of time to make sure that you can do these things and do them in-house.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Edwards.
You know, we keep, I think we're probably, we're planning, but we're also reacting somewhat, I think. Guys, here's the deal. People are coming no matter what. So if we try to manage it the best we can, that's all we can truly do. However, if you look at things like the quarry, if you look at things that the areas that are booming, you look at UTSA, you look at those areas. I remember when UTSA was out in the country, we thought, you know, who's going out there? That's too far. But now you think about it, density, when you think about the dense makes sense statement, it does. When you want other things to happen and you want to see the amenities, someone brought up restaurants earlier. Someone kept saying, we need restaurants. Well, folks, restaurants, they come in and say, hey, what's the population? What's the credit card swipes? They look at what's the economic impact for us? I mean, because they know so many people are going to go so many different locations. They know you sometimes better than you know you, you know? So I think that we need to really consider the whole thing about, you know, one home per 5 acres. You know, that was a great idea. When everybody said, let's keep it rural. But reality is, I mean, for the Whole Foods, for the big companies to come out and take a look and anchor a store, they want to see the population. And that's why IKEA went exactly where they are. I mean, I'm quite sure there's some economic development rules there too, but I do believe it when they put that dot in the map and say, let's draw that circle and what's the population, 1 mile, 3 mile, 4 mile, 6 mile rings, they look at the draw, what they can bring into their restaurant or to their location. So we have to really give some consideration to what we're doing. And so I would be willing to say, you know, we need to relook at the 1 in 5 acres. I mean, 1 home per 5 acres. I think we need to look at that because I certainly don't want to mow 5 acres. I don't. I mean, you think about 43,560 square feet, right? I mean, you put a 10,000 square foot home, you still got a lot of dirt to mow and a lot of landscaping. I mean, some people love that. I mean, all of us grew up going to our family farm or whatever, right? But the reality of it all is now that things are we're in this metroplex area, and guys, the density is going to continue to happen. We need to embrace that. And try to live through it.
Mr. Brown?
Thank you. I'm not against density by any means, but at the same time, Southern Schertz is severely, or not severely, but is very sensitive to the Randolph flight patterns. And Randolph flight patterns are important to our economy as well. Okay, a lot more than what a restaurant will bring. we already have dense population north of 78. I'm not going to say northern Schertz, but north of 78, and there's certainly more room to put dense centers in there to attract, the retail, the restaurant, the spending, et cetera. Whereas down in that rural area, keeping them a little bit more open, keeping the Air Force happy with us, I think that's a good mindset as well. Some of those folks that were in here recently, begging us to change things so that their property values would increase. And one gentleman that said, there's no developer in his right mind that'll develop acreage lots anymore. Check his address where he lives, please.
So I'll disagree with you, Mr. Edwards, a little bit, but not completely. I think we can embrace density and let the cities around us take care of that problem for us, and we'll maintain what we see as Schertz. I do believe that the cities around us are going to run with great speed at growing their population and having plenty of density. And I want to be the other kid on the block that has a big yard to mow and a nice restaurant to go to because somebody else crammed them into a small area. But we're going to have time to talk about that as we go through here. We need to move forward on our comprehensive land plan. Mr. Davis.
Yeah, this is the one where I don't think we need to move fast on it. I think the UDC is a different topic, but on this, sitting out there for many years, sitting up here for a couple, we do have to be cognizant of Randolph and the impact of what we do to Randolph Air Force Base. Absolutely. But I recall hearing some conversations before where, we planned on doing development on that side of 1518, which is why we have the cross line on that side of 1518. Laurel Heights and a few other things. We have another development coming down there on that side of Randolph with San Antonio, and we have this big yellow section on the other side of Schertz, South Schertz, where we're talking about 1 to 5 acres. I'm certainly not against having some lots for 1 to 5 acres, and I think there is a demand for that. I certainly wouldn't mind having 5 acres because there's times where I don't like my neighbor to the left of me or the right of me, based on what they're doing. But the reality of it is, looking at this current map and having that large of a section with just a blanket coverage of 1 to 5 acres, I think it's time to at least have the discussion and talk about it. You look at this map right here, and that big yellow blob at the top is Crescent Bend Nature Park. So that entire big yellow blot at the top, all of that is Crescent Bend Nature Park. That's not going to be any house per 5 acres, per any acre. So to me, it's a matter of getting this updated to reflect what's really down there and having those discussions as to what we want. I think there's some areas there where we probably would want to and should keep it 1 to 5 acres. There's also some areas out there where, maybe that's not the right answer, like the frontage of 10 down there at the very bottom. So I think it's worthwhile having that discussion and getting some public input again. And again, things change over time. What was the right answer 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago may not hold true today. And I made the comment before, a lot of those folks that were here a couple of weeks ago talking about, I can't do anything with my property at 1 to 5 acres, were the ones that I specifically recall a few of them standing and addressing the council when I moved here in 2007, because I used to come to council every Tuesday, and they were the ones that would say, this land is farmland. It's been in my farmland for 150 years. My great-grandfather farmed it. My grandfather farmed it. My father farmed it. I farmed it. My kids are going to farm it. And it'll never be anything but a farm until 3 weeks ago. Now it's like, well, I want to have a development. So, the reality of it is they have property rights as well. I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to say, well, this is what it is and that's what it's going to be. They've changed their minds apparently. I don't think it's a bad idea to put this on the list of to do and get some current perspective as to what's the right thing to do for Schertz in general.
I think we'll have many discussions as we move forward and as you bring suggestions back to the council. Also give us time to contemplate and think about what we've talked about tonight and what we'll see in the future. So if there's nothing else on that one, then you have what you need, sir?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. The next item on the agenda is the roll call vote confirmation.
The first vote was under workshop resolution 19R35. Councilmember Edwards made the motion. Councilmember Davis seconded. Mayor Pro Tem Hayward voted yes. Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Edwards, Scagliola, and Brown voted yes. Motion passed. Item on consent agenda, items 1 through 8 and 10. Councilmember Edwards made the vote. Councilmember Brown made the second. Mayor Pro Tem Hayward voted yes. Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Edwards, Scagliola, and Brown voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 9, resolution number 19R37. Councilmember Edwards made the motion. Councilmember Davis seconded. Mayor Pro Tem Hayward voted yes. Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Edwards, Scagliola, and Brown voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 11, ordinance number 19M12, first and final reading. Chair made the motion. Councilmember Brown made a second. Mayor Pro Tem Hayward voted yes. Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Edwards, and Brown voted yes. Councilmember Scagliola voted no. Motion passed 6-1. Item number 12, ordinance number 19T13, first and final reading. Councilmember Scagliola made the motion. Councilmember Edwards seconded. Mayor Pro Tem Hayward voted yes. Councilmember Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Edwards, Scagliola, and Brown voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 13, resolution 19R40. Councilmember Edwards made the motion. Councilmember Davis made the second. Mayor Pro Tem Hayward voted yes. Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Edwards, Scagliola, and Brown voted yes. Motion passed.
All right, thank you. Any corrections or amendments? There being none, we'll move on. Next item, announcements by the city manager. Anything further, Dr. Brown?
Nothing further.
Very good. Request by the mayor and council members, items to be placed on a future city council agenda. Anything that we need that we don't currently have scheduled? Seeing none, we'll move on. Announcements by the mayor and council members. We'll start with Mayor Pro Tem Hayward.
So I was kind of busy for this week. I went to the 23rd Annual Remembrance Day. That was the first one I attended. It was moving to see, what the city does for passed on employees. I went to the SSLGC Hal Baldwin plaque unveiling. That was a neat thing to do. Went to the Senior Center meeting, their mid-month meeting. I attended that. I went to the taste. That was awesome. Got to taste a lot of good food. Then left there and went to the Audi dealership for their grand opening in Selma. That one was a little bit different. It was high-end, and the cars were high-end. I attended the ACOG Planning and Zoning Workshop. I went to the BVYA opening day, the Benny Keith grand opening in Selma, the Cibolo Kite Festival. Then I attended the AAMPO meeting, and then I did the Student Council Mayor today.
Apparently there was no additional time available. That's a full schedule. A full schedule. Mr. Davis?
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Gutierrez?
Quite a bit, just like she said. The plaque dedication for Hal Baldwin, that was very interesting. The vision the man had for this area. It was great to see that he was honored in that way. The taste, great food, and thanks to all the participants and the chamber for putting it together. Also went to the AACOG. They discussed planning and zoning, planning and land use. That was interesting. The Employee Remembrance Day. That's also very touching and a way to honor our employees here that served our city. HOA council meeting. We had a great turnout. The BVYA baseball opening ceremony, and also the Johnny McDowell Park dedication. Shred Day. Only spent a couple minutes, left my box, and forgot about the park dedication, and quickly left. My apologies for not helping them. Thanks for Waste Management for the spring cleanup. I also took advantage of my two visits. The AAMPO, they had an interesting conversation regarding the toll road issue at Cibolo. The job fair, thanks for the economic development for hosting that job fair. It's a great opportunity for our businesses and also our community to fill in those vacancies. And also the Student Council Day, thanks to Miss Brenda for making this happen. That's all.
Very good, Mr. Larson. Mr. Edwards.
Mr. Mayor, I think we've all had a very busy week. Of course, the taste was great. Great opportunity to get out and share in some of the festivities and hang out with some of the people that are actually out there making it happen in the city of Schertz, and also they're feeding us all the time. I need to stop that. Benny Keith grand opening. Great opportunity to go over and visit with some of the people in the some of the guys that are movers and shakers at Benny Keith. They fed us very well there as well. Then we went down from there, we went to opening day first, of course. And Mr. Mayor, I want to tell you, great job at opening day, but I can certainly remember years past that your pitch was a little bit better. Just your
That's okay. I get to have the last word tonight.
The kid caught the pitch, though. I want to thank you for including Mayor Boyle and Cibolo in that event as well. A great opportunity. The monument for Johnny McDowell, guys. That guy exemplifies what service and volunteerism is. That organization has done a great job in this community. So shouts out to BVYA and what they've done. The students today asked a lot of great questions. They were really interested in government. And Mia was a breath of fresh air. Great kid. And Dr. Brown, thank you for coming in and helping us with that as well. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Very good. Dr. Scagliola?
Yeah, the chamber luncheon, super, as usual. Then the Remembrance Day. Thursday was pretty busy. SSLGC and the dedication of the station to Mayor Baldwin. The taste, I just want to make mention that Abel's Diner, you're looking for a good place to eat. He actually was a star performer at the taste. It walked away with three awards. Yeah. And then Saturday was pretty busy with the trifecta, BVYA dedication there, the Senior Center Market Day or market event, and then Keith's in Selma. So overall, it's been a fairly busy week. That's all I have, sir.
Very good. Mr. Brown?
Nowhere near as busy, but we did do the HOA meeting with the rest of the council. We had our late night audit committee review. That was fun. Did the taste, Benny Keith, and today, separate from city council, but still important, I believe, I went up to the Capitol with the Realtor community and spent the day up there reviewing what's going on. And I'll give a little bit of credit out there to our state senator and district representatives. They're working hard. They remember us. They know where Schertz is on the map, and they know that we're a population center to not forget. So they are up there.
Fantastic. I also attended many of the events that you all mentioned. I also attended last Thursday evening, the Thursday night fight night, which is an event put on largely by the development community and supported then of all the other businesses that support the development community in San Antonio. And I can tell you of all the various people that I met and spoke to there, every one of them knows where Schertz is. Every one of them knows what we're doing here. Every one of them is quite aware that while we may only be a city of 40,000, that we have an impact. And Mr. Edwards, when there was a 10-year-old that I was throwing a pitch to, I was able to step back and throw the ball. When you have a young 5-year-old there who's kind of got the glove doing, you have to temper it, otherwise you're going to miss or miss 3 times as I did a few years ago, and I didn't want to do that again. But we'll come back again to the folks in San Antonio knowing that Schertz is on the map, and we'll end the night, since it's nice and late, waxing a little poetic and reference gently to Shakespeare. Though he be small, he be mighty. If there's nothing else from the city of Schertz this evening, we stand adjourned.